A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. The phone call came out of the blue, shattering the fragile peace I had crafted for myself and my 2 young children in the years since the divorce. "He's gone," the voice on the other end faltered, and my heart sank. It was from a mutual friend, one of the few remaining ties to a man who had once been my partner before life took us down vastly different paths. The news of my ex-husband's sudden passing brought forth a wave of conflicting emotions that crashed over me like a stormy sea: anger, grief, and even remnants of love mingled with memories of the life we built together, now reduced to echoes and ghostly shadows. My children, Jason and Lily, played quietly in the living room, unaware of the turmoil brewing just beyond their innocence. What would I tell them? Should I bring them to the funeral? As the moments ticked away, I wrestled with the thought, envisioning their little faces, so full of curiosity and imagination, grappling with something so profound as death. Eventually, I made the decision: they needed to see their father, even if it was just a final goodbye wrapped in an unfamiliar wrapping of grief and closure. On the day of the funeral, the autumn leaves fluttered to the ground, painting a poignant backdrop of gold and crimson. The church, its steeple rising into the gray sky, seemed to absorb the sorrow unfolding within its walls. I held both of their small hands as we walked through the heavy wooden doors, the hushed murmurs of relatives and friends swirling around us like fog. I could feel Jason's grip tighten, his eyes darting nervously at the sight of people dressed in black, while Lily, blissfully unaware, kept asking where her daddy was. My heart ached at that innocent question. Would it be too much for them? Would they understand why we were here? But I swallowed my doubts, reminding myself that this was as much a part of our story as the laughter we had shared. We took our seats near the front, my heart racing as the service unfolded. Each word felt like a weighted stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. Echoes of memories, both painful and beautiful, reverberated in my mind, weaving a tapestry of our shared past. The moment we stood to say our final goodbyes, it became harder. Jason leaned against me, his small shoulders shaking with suppressed emotions, while Lily reached up, eyes wide and confused, asking in a hushed voice why everyone was crying. I knelt beside her, trying to explain, but my voice caught in my throat as I remembered the last time he had held her. In that frail, intimate moment, I was struck by a pang of guilt. Was I cross-building grief for my daughters? Or was this a brave moment for them, an opportunity to learn about loss and love in its most raw form? As we placed flowers on the casket, the scent mixing with the damp air, I felt a blend of sorrow and relief. Through the pain, I saw a flicker of resilience in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that we had each other, bonded by our grief but steadfast against the storms beyond. The funeral was a long-awaited clarity, an intricate knot being untied slowly but surely, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. When it was done, and we stepped outside, the sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting a warm glow on our faces like a quiet blessing. As we drove home, the atmosphere in the car felt strangely lighter despite the weight of the day's events. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing my kids fall asleep, heads leaning against each other without a care in the world. A soft hum of a lullaby from the radio melded perfectly with their gentle breathing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps I had done the right thing. I knew that the question would linger in the shadows of my mind: am I the asshole for taking them to their dad's funeral? But at that moment, I felt the weight of the world lift just a little, enough to know that perhaps this was a pivotal moment for all of us. When we got home, I tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and closed their door lightly. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on our journey and the love that continued to bind us, even amid chaos. Maybe in sharing that last goodbye with their father, I taught them more about life and love than I could have anticipated. A few months later, after grappling with the grief and growing even closer as a family, I received a message from my ex-husband's sister, expressing gratitude for bringing the children to the funeral. She had shared how seeing Jason and Lily, alive and full of spirit, reminded everyone of the kindness he had in life even after the rocky years of our separation. It surprised me how much that acknowledgement lifted my spirits. And as I sat under the evening sky, watching the stars blink to life, I finally felt at peace with my decision. Through heartbreak, we had found a new, albeit different, strength, and I had come to realize that even in death, there are lessons of love we could carry forward. In the days following the funeral, I found myself reflecting on the lessons we had extracted from such a heavy experience. The gray clouds still lingered, but they had dulled, and the sun had begun to peek through them, offering a tender warmth I hadn't felt in months. Jason and Lily seemed lighter, too, their laughter echoing through our home like notes of a sweet melody that I had forgotten existed. We often held impromptu dance parties in our living room, twirling around to songs we'd collectively chosen, diving into that blissful state where worries melted away. It was during one of these dance-offs that I looked down to see their wide, carefree grins mirrored in my own, and at that moment, I realized how profoundly their father's passing had transformed our lives. What I had originally feared would unravel the fragile stitchwork of our family, his absence, was, against all odds, stitching us closer together. I thought of the days when I would speak about Jason, carefully, navigating the minefield of memories. I never belittled the complexities of our past, but as we revisited those moments, his laugh during movie nights, his ridiculous attempts at cooking, I saw my kids embrace their father's humanity. They were mourning him, but they were also celebrating the colorful imprints he had left behind. It was a complicated tapestry of memories, threaded with both pain and joy, and we were weaving it tighter each time we shared those tales. One evening, while tucking them into bed, Lily, with her big brown eyes twinkling like stars, asked if we could make a memory jar. "We can put in all the best things we remember about Dad," she said softly, her tiny fingers pulling the hem of her blanket. Jason nodded, his brow furrowed in thought, thinking of the happiest moments he could find. We grabbed an assortment of markers, colorful paper, and a simple glass jar I had kept on a shelf, dusting it off like a forgotten treasure. Night after night, we would write little stories, favorite moments, even sporadic thoughts that seemed to flash from the corners of their minds, each one a colorful reflection of their father. It felt cathartic, as though by encapsulating those memories, we were holding on to him in a way that wouldn't let go as time moved forward. Yet, there was still a lingering uncertainty in my heart. Even with the sense of community that filled my surroundings, I feared judgment. Did I make the right choice about the funeral? On an increasingly quiet evening, I found myself scrolling through social media, the old posts, the funeral photos, comments of sympathy interspersed with shared memories. Yet there it was, the muffled sting of one comment that caught my eye and twisted in my gut: why on earth would you bring the kids to their father's funeral? I swallowed hard, contemplating the bluntness of it. Did I really make a grave mistake by honoring a man they had known as their father? Poking at that old wound opened up a familiar cascade of guilt. The anger crept in, too. It was unfair to project their feelings onto me. I had tried my best. As I flipped through the comments, I stumbled upon a thoughtful reply that shifted my perspective. Maybe it was a lesson in love for them, not an act of cruelty. Feeling the heaviness lift slightly, I realized I wasn't alone in this. So many parents face judgment, and for each of those harsh voices echoing in my mind, there were countless parents who had found their own way, each soldiering through their challenges, fighting battles of their own, learning to let love guide them. I closed my phone with a newfound determination and focused instead on my children who were now deep asleep, the reassuring sound of their breaths filling the room like a comforting lullaby. Weeks passed and our little family developed a new rhythm. I sometimes still encountered sporadic judgment, especially within our small town, like when I would run into familiar faces at the grocery store. Each smiled. Nod felt loaded. Sometimes, people would make small talk about the weather, while others would simply look down, avoiding eye contact altogether. Those moments were filled with undertones of unspoken words, yet they began to bother me less. I remembered why I had made the choice to bring Jason and Lily to that funeral. It was about remembering, celebrating, and finding closure, the very things we were doing in our memory jar. One day, as we were placing a new handwritten memory into the jar, a ticket stub from a concert we had attended, it struck me how much healing was packed into those tiny slips of paper. They were seeds, really, nurturing new perspectives and fostering an understanding of our past. It had opened the door to conversations about life, love, and everything in between. I knew then that whatever anyone else might say, I was right where I needed to be. And so, as the nights rolled on and our little tradition of adding to the memory jar continued, I found that it not only enclosed stories about Jason but also made space for our own emerging narrative, a story of resilience, love, and the determination to move forward while cherishing the footprints left behind. Perhaps it wouldn't heal every pang of grief, but it fortified us with a sense of purpose in honoring what remained. With each memory shared, I felt our spirits intertwine, a quiet testament that life and love would always find a way. As I sat with them wrapped in their dreams, I recognized the profound truth in that sentiment. Even amidst the chaos of our history, we had woven a tapestry of love that would only continue to grow. And perhaps with that, I wouldn't just be a survivor of our heartache, I would be a champion for the enduring bond that we shared, a reminder that even through loss, life persistently finds room for love. The days following the funeral, I found myself wandering through a landscape of emotions that felt bright yet shadowed at times. I would often catch the scent of Jason's cologne lingering on an old jacket in the closet, a bittersweet reminder of our past that pulled at my heartstrings. The kids adjusted remarkably well to the absence of their father. For them, it was a cascade of memories they could sift through, moments captured in laughter and warmth. I often found them buried under blankets as they shared stories about their favorites, the camping trips in the backyard that morphed into grand adventures or the spontaneous kitchen experiments that ended in a mess but always ended with giggles. Their joy danced around me, a soothing balm for the ache of loss, and I began to understand the true gifts Jason had left behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I sat with Lily and Jason at the kitchen table, painting the memories that still flickered in our hearts. We had set out a canvas, brush strokes letting each of us contribute a color or shape that represented our remembrances. I watched as they threaded together tales of camping escapades mixed with their father's goofy jokes and stories about how he'd always sing the wrong lyrics to their favorite songs. The laughter rang out like a melody, a stark contrast to the somber silence that had enveloped our home just days earlier. I could see how much they lived in those precious whirls of color and warmth, every stroke a testament to their resilience and the love that endured beyond our pain. My heart swelled with pride, a realization that even through our fragmented family, the bond we shared was vibrant and alive, creating a shelter at a time when rain threatened to wash away hope. It became clear to me that we were shaping our own narrative together now, one filled with the richness of memories and the promise of new beginnings, however uncertain they might be. This was our therapy, a way to weave Jason's essence into our lives rather than letting it vanish into silence. Every time I saw my children immerse themselves in their memories, a newfound sense of purpose washed over me. They were, in many ways, guiding me to a conclusion I hadn't been ready to face just days before. Jason had left us much more than just memories of times gone by. He had imparted lessons on how to love deeply, even when things were imperfect. As the nights rolled on, I embraced the routine of storytelling, of laughter ringing through our home, and of painting their dreams. I shared with them how loss could transform into appreciation, encouraging them to always look at the silver lining, however faint it may seem on some days. Our conversations turned from sorrow to dreams of the future, filled with wild wishes and hopes that danced in their eyes. It was in moments like these that I found clarity. The past, however tumultuous, shaped not just our pain but also our resilience and our ability to pivot, to adapt, and to rise anew. One night, tucking Lily into bed after another day of reminiscing and laughter, she looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with understanding far beyond her years. "Mom," she whispered, "maybe Daddy just wanted us to be happy. Maybe that's why he wanted us to remember the fun times and not the sad ones." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of ageless wisdom being passed down, both a reflection of her father's love and her own burgeoning understanding of life. "You're right, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her close. "He wanted us to be happy, and we can honor him by living fully." As I kissed my children goodnight, a warm sense of acceptance enveloped me. I realized that Jason's death could be the end of a chapter, but it wouldn't be the end of our story. As weeks turned into months, I noticed more than just a glimmer of hope trying to burst forth in our lives. The kids began to smile more freely, and in quiet moments, they'd share funny stories about a dad who would come home with silly toys or initiate awkward dance-offs in the living room. Moments I never fully appreciated while he was there. Together we began acknowledging our pain without letting it govern our lives. Over time, I found myself at the edge of true healing, discovering that while life could be harsh, it was also beautiful, and it was our responsibility to keep it alive, to fuel it with laughter, love, and warmth. In a strange twist of fate, I became a tribute bearer of Jason's heart. And just as summer began to yield to the cool whispers of fall, I noticed an unexpected lightness in my step. It struck me one chilly evening as we roasted marshmallows in the backyard, the laughter, the camaraderie we had built, the jokes shared, this was what Jason would have wanted. We were not defining our lives by our loss, rather, we were embracing it as part of our complex tapestry. When the stars shone brightly that night, I felt the words of my children touching the strands of my heart. "Let's do this every week," Jason exclaimed as he handed me his s'more creation. "He'd definitely want us to enjoy the fun stuff." I smiled, realizing that through our journey, we would forever carry the essence of our shared past with us, not as a burden, but as a beacon, guiding us toward a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. And so, we molded a new memory each week under the stars, stitching Jason into the fabric of our lives more beautifully than I ever thought possible. Months later, As I reflected on our journey, I felt a profound sense of gratitude shape my being. Life, I concluded, like love, is an evolving narrative, an intricate dance of letting go and holding on. A few friends had reached out tentatively since the funeral, offering their condolences while hesitantly questioning my choices, but I found comfort and pride in my decision to bring the kids. It solidified our legacy and illustrated to my children the importance of accepting life's dual nature, both its joys and sorrows. With every memory painted and every moment shared, we were crafting a life that resonated not just with happiness but with an understanding that love endures, transcending even the hardest of goodbyes. And in that realization, as I moved that evening to snuff out the small fire in the backyard, I whispered a quiet promise into the night. Our future would be colored with the hues of hope, courage, and unwavering love, welcoming all the joy that life dared to send our way. I never thought I would find myself in a situation that led me to question my own morals over something as simple as a dog and a few disgruntled neighbors, but life has a curious way of throwing challenges our way when we least expect them. My name is Sam, and I've lived in the same cozy house at the end of Maplewood Street for just over 5 years. It had always been a peaceful neighborhood, one where the biggest concern was whether Miss Thompson's hydrangeas would bloom in time for her garden party, rather than petty squabbles or disputes. My trusty companion, Bella, a golden retriever with an insatiable curiosity, quickly became a favorite amongst the neighbors. She possessed an innate ability to brighten the bleakest of days, her joy was infectious, and her gentle nature made her an ideal friend not just to me but to everyone around. However, a recent encounter had left me wrestling with doubt. Had I crossed a line by allowing Bella to handle things her way? One evening, after a long day at work where the creaking of office chairs and flickering fluorescent lights had drained my energy, I decided to take Bella out for her usual evening run in the backyard. The sky had started to shift into softer shades of pink and orange, and the chirping of crickets began to fill the air, creating the perfect setting for a little relaxation. As I sat on the porch, watching Bella chase her tennis ball, I noticed our neighbors, the Johnsons, arguing animatedly across the street. They had been embroiled in a feud over their new fence, which was apparently too close to the property line. I had overheard snippets of it during my outdoor mornings but chose to remain uninvolved. Those moments of rivalry never seemed to disrupt the usual tranquility of our community, until this particular night. Suddenly, Bella, intrigued by the commotion, stopped mid-chase, her ears perked up, and in a heartbeat, she dashed towards the Johnsons, barking excitedly as she approached. I could see that her spirited barks caught the attention of both the Johnsons and the other family involved in the argument. For a moment, I thought of calling her back. She could either brighten the situation or distract them further. But then another bark escaped her lips, one that projected confidence, asserting her presence as if she held the authority of a canine peacekeeper. Instead of instinctively recalling Bella, I hesitated, watching the scene unfold from the safety of my porch, wondering if she's playfully trying to referee the situation. And just like that, things took an unexpected turn. The Johnsons turned their frustrated expressions into amused ones, laughter emerging between their vehemence as they observed my dog prancing confidently around them, seemingly oblivious to their spats. They began to lower their voices, almost whispering as Bella circled them, trying to engage with each person. For a fleeting moment, it felt like an amusing break, a moment of levity that cut through the tension. However, the spell was short-lived. Bella, with a boundless enthusiasm, ran back towards me, leaping like an eager puppy, proud of her tiny intervention. I felt a rush of warmth and pride swell in my chest, perhaps she had achieved something with her playful antics. But as I turned my gaze back to the Johnsons, I noticed their expressions had mutated, now they glared at me. "Nice dog you got there," one of them shouted, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Maybe next time, you should control her better." I could feel my heart sink, the weight of their disappointment echoing in the air. Suddenly, I felt the eyes of everyone in the neighborhood upon me, a million unspoken questions lingering in the cool evening breeze. Had I really done something worth faulting? Should I have acted differently? Inside, I started an internal debate, wondering if perhaps I was indeed the instigator of my neighborly woes. That evening, while Bella rested by my feet, I found myself scrolling through community chat groups, curiosity tugging at my conscience. Other residents had chimed in, seemingly discussing the need to reprimand Bella, a dog not only meant to protect but also to be a disruptor of harmony. I felt trapped in a moral maze, conflicting thoughts swirling in my mind. Days passed with a heavy silence between me and the Johnsons. I apologized in hushed tones whenever I encountered them, but their retorts were chilly and distant. I can't describe the unease I felt each time Bella barked, looking up at me with her bright eyes, as if asking me to send her after the neighbors once more. Eventually, my anxiety morphed into anger, not towards the Johnsons but at myself. I had wanted to keep the peace, yet now I was left feeling like a villain in my own home, called by a series of decisions made out of impulse rather than malice. I couldn't shake off the question that lingered inside my mind: am I the asshole for not recalling my dog when she chased my neighbors off my property? In the days that followed, I grew more reflective. I realized how easy it was to get caught up in the perceptions of others, leading me to slowly let go of my guilt. Bella was innocent in all this, an unwitting participant in a human conflict that had spiraled beyond playful barks. It dawned on me that I wasn't just protecting her by allowing her to chase off the Johnsons, I was allowing her to be herself, vibrant and carefree. As the summer skies grew darker, I made a decision: I would invite the Johnsons over for a barbecue, an opportunity to mend the rift that had caused an unwelcoming chill in our neighborhood. Stepping outside, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, but I steadied my breath and carried on. The smell of grilled burgers began to fill the air, and as the Johnsons tentatively approached our doorstep with initial reservations, all that slowly began to shift. The encounter ended with laughter, Bella stealing the spotlight as she playfully wooed every guest for scraps. Finally, as the sun set, painting the sky with hues of lavender and indigo, we gathered around the fire pit, quietly acknowledging that conflict is part of living in close proximity. Reflecting on that night under the stars, I found a sense of peace, an understanding that while we may err in our judgment, it's how we come together afterward that truly matters. My heart swelled with relief as I realized that I hadn't harmed my neighbors. Instead, I had enabled a chance for connections to deepen. And as for Bella? She's still a free spirit, and I wouldn't want her any other way. Update: a week after the barbecue, I received a message from the Johnsons over the neighborhood chat group, thanking me for an enjoyable evening. They recognized their own part in the initial escalation and shared stories of their own pets that offered a glimpse into their world. It turns out, all it took was a little ceremony of shared laughter and the promise of goodwill to wipe the slate clean and embark on a more harmonious chapter for Maplewood Street. My heart swells with hope and understanding that sometimes, all it takes is a playful dog to remind us of the bonds that can uplift our community. As I sat on my porch that evening, the sun dipping low beyond the horizon and casting golden hues over Maplewood Street, I reflected on how transformative the past few days had been. Bella, my spirited golden retriever, lay by my feet, her gentle breathing a soothing rhythm against the chirping of crickets that began to fill the air. Each time I glanced down at her soft, golden fur, I felt a swell of gratitude, not just for her loyal companionship, but for the unexpected bridge she had built between my neighbors and me. The Johnsons, with their youthful laughter and easygoing nature, had become a source of warmth in my life that I hadn't anticipated. When I first moved to this suburb, I was hopeful yet slightly reticent about engaging with my neighbors. After living in a busy city for years, where the sounds of traffic drowned out the feeble attempts at community greetings, I was unaccustomed to the warmth that now blossomed around me. Having lived the last few years in solitude, the hum of community life felt both refreshing and intimidating. At the beginning of my stay in Maplewood, I remained an observer, smiling at neighbors from a distance, offering polite waves but never venturing further. But Bella's exuberance had a knack for cutting through my apprehension. She would trot up to anyone with uncontainable excitement, her tail wagging furiously, urging me to engage. It was through her antics that I began to learn the names of the folks who lived nearby and shared snippets of their lives. That fateful day when Bella decided to chase off those obnoxious trespassers had initially left me feeling anxious, fearing the potential backlash and the strain on our freshly budding relationships. Yet, the message from the Johnsons had shifted everything. The evening had unfolded so beautifully, a mosaic of laughter and stories unveiling our shared experiences. The gentle banter about our pets broke down walls that I had previously thought were impenetrable. It marked the day my neighbors invited me into their circle, emphasizing that we were all human, susceptible to misunderstandings and hesitant connections. As twilight settled in, I thought about how far I had come, and in a subtle way, it dawned on me that life in Maplewood had started to feel like home. With each shared moment over the preceding weekend, the lines between neighbors faded, replaced by the understanding that we were all just trying to navigate this chaotic, beautiful tapestry called life. I smiled to myself, recalling how Bella had innocently prompted our little gathering, a series of unforeseen events all triggered by her instinct to protect, a fierce loyalty accompanied by boundless joy, the very essence of what made dogs so remarkable. Curiously, as the last light of day melted away, I found myself drafting a message in my mind to post later in the neighborhood chat. Something simple yet heartfelt. Perhaps I would propose a summer barbecue, nothing fancy, just some burgers and laughter, a casual gathering where we could continue to weave our lives together. My fingers itched to get the words down, eager to strike while the iron was hot and maintain the warmth that had ignited between us. Yes, I thought, this includes all of the neighbors, everyone from the retirees down the street to the young families who had recently moved in. They all deserved a chance to feel that sense of camaraderie that had begun to envelop Maplewood Street, all sparked by a dog's undeniable spirit. As I rose to prepare a late dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that a new chapter was unfolding for our little corner of the world. The lesson I had gleaned over the last few days was profound. It's extraordinary how a bit of laughter, understanding, and goodwill could shape lives and communities peacefully. I knew within me that this was only the beginning, a gentle nudge towards deeper connections and lasting friendships, all thanks to the loud bark of my beloved dog who believed that every heart could be won over with a wagging tail and a little unfiltered enthusiasm. And as I stepped inside, Bella stood up in a stretch, nuzzling against my leg as if to say, "Let's get to work on building that community, Mom." The ceaseless love we give and receive simply overlaps so effortlessly. In that moment, I felt ready for whatever adventures lay ahead, knowing Bella and I would tackle them together. With Bella's warm presence grounding me, I felt an undeniable shift in the air, one that flowed through the walls of our home and into the very fabric of Maplewood Street. It was invigorating to think that we could play a role in transforming our neighborhood, where once there was tension, there could now be laughter, forgiveness, and camaraderie. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I pondered how to harness this newfound energy. With the holiday season approaching, a neighborhood block party began to form in my mind, a chance to weave everyone together, even more so than that initial gathering at my house. I quickly created a shared document and dropped it into the neighborhood chat. To my delight, responses flooded in with ideas for food, games, and festive decorations. The more the Johnsons and their 2 kids offered up their favorite recipes, the more others contributed their own delicious dishes. It felt like we were collectively crafting a feast that would tell the story of Maplewood Street, encompassing all of our backgrounds and cultures, with Bella's joyful spirit leading the way. As preparations progressed, Bella became my little assistant. She accompanied me on trips to the local farmers market, where we picked up fresh fruits and vegetables, sniffing around stalls and earning a few head pats from smiling vendors. Each delivery and every shopping trip felt like a micro-venture, her excitement infectious as onlookers marveled at the boundless energy radiating from my ever-enthusiastic companion. Our conversations at home shifted too. No longer were the evenings filled with dull chatter about mundane tasks. Instead, we reveled in brainstorming creative ideas for the party decorations, mixing ideas of string lights with a DIY photo booth featuring props inspired by the quirky personalities of our neighbors. It was a charming banter with Bella by my side, her tail thumping against the floor as if she were adding her own approval to each suggestion. Then came the big day of the block party. Warm sunlight spilled across the street as laughter and hustle filled the once empty spaces. Everyone had pitched in, and our front yard stood transformed into a gathering place adorned with twinkling lights and vibrant banners. Bella darted through the clusters of people, eager to greet everyone, her playful spirit breaking the ice as children giggled and adults shared stories over plates filled with food. It felt as if we had unearthed hidden gems in our neighbors. The taciturn Mr. Harris revealed himself to be a fantastic storyteller, regaling us with tales of his youth, while Mrs. Jenkins brought out an incredible chocolate cake that seemed to disappear within minutes. Throughout that magical afternoon, I found myself reflecting on how just a month ago, stress and uncertainty hung over our neighborhood like a dark cloud, and now, the air was thick with camaraderie and connection. Bella would chase after the kids, barking delightedly as they tossed a frisbee, her playful barks mixing harmoniously with their laughter. Occasionally, one of the little ones would tumble into one of the neighboring groups, and the adults would rush to comfort them, smiles on their faces still. I realized Bella was weaving her charm, encouraging openness, kindness, and unguarded laughter among us all. As dusk approached, an impromptu circle formed around a fire pit, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging from above. The warmth of the flames complemented the connectedness that blossomed around me, forging bonds between families and thoughts of future gatherings already swirling in the air. By the time the last glow of the sun dipped behind the horizon, I caught sight of Bella nestled comfortably in my lap as we wrapped up the evening, her breath deep in content. A gentle peace enveloped me. It dawned on me that community is born from simple gestures. It is about being present for each other and willingly sharing our lives. Who would have thought that one chaotic chase, followed by a knock on all our hearts, would lead us here? With every heartfelt joke exchanged and every food sample shared, I felt the barriers that had once distanced us crumble away to reveal a welcoming embrace of unity. Perhaps Bella was right all along. With a wagging tail and a heart open to connection, even the most fragmented of communities can truly come together. As I tucked Bella in for the night and settled onto the couch, I opened my phone only to find another message from the neighborhood group, this one a suggestion for a weekly potluck. Reading their words made my heart swell again. With the promise of next week already on the horizon, I realized Bella had sparked not just a party, but a movement, a shift in the hearts of those around us. As I drifted off to sleep, wrapped in the warmth of that community spirit, I felt an unwavering optimism for the future take root within me, certain that together with Bella, we would navigate whatever adventures awaited us. It was a humid summer evening, the kind that clung to your skin with its heat and filled the air with a sense of restless energy that made everything feel a little more alive. My friends and I had gathered in Aaron's dimly lit basement, the kind of place we felt safe in, safely tucked away from the world, where secrets and laughter echoed off the concrete walls. We were all entering our junior year of high school, and for the first time since middle school, we felt grown up enough for a night of truth or dare, with all the bravado and mischief that seemed to come with it. The atmosphere was electric, fueled by the dim glow of fairy lights strung across the ceiling and the hum of our excitement. I sat cross-legged on the worn-out carpet with Liz and Tyler to my right and Tim on my left, my heart racing, caught up in the thrill of the night, uncertainty bubbling to the surface with each round. The dares began innocently enough. Tim had to text his crush a cringe-worthy pickup line, while Liz found herself balancing a spoon on her nose. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed a little too freely, the dares escalated. That's when Ariel, the often quiet but fiercely intelligent girl who usually sat on the fringes of our group, surprised us all with her growing confidence. She challenged Aaron, who was always the jokester, to kiss the girl he found the least attractive in the room. Everyone can vouch for how ridiculous that was. We all knew his longtime crush was Katie, who wasn't even here. But instead of backing down, Aaron shot a mischievous grin and declared he'd do it. With barely a moment's hesitation, he leaned in and planted a quick kiss on my cheek. The room fell silent, and it felt like the air had been sucked out of us. I could feel my face flush, a mix of shock and something else fluttering in my stomach, and I froze. They all erupted in laughter, but my laughter was hollow, a shell around a growing anxiety that twisted in my gut. I didn't expect the heat of embarrassment to turn into something deeply unsettling as he casually brushed it off and returned to his place among the crowd. A wave of unease rolled through me as the night continued, my friends cycling through more ridiculous dares while I sat fidgeting, trying to shake off the warmth that still lingered on my skin. My mind raced, caught in this internal war. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a prank while another part was helplessly fascinated by the fleeting intimacy of the moment. That's when Ariel turned to me, visibly picking up on my discomfort. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked softly, her brows knitted with concern. It was a simple question, yet loaded with meaning in a room where honesty was a fleeting currency. I shrugged, forcing a smile, but something in her gaze compelled me to admit more. I didn't expect that. It felt. I don't know. I trailed off, desperately searching for the right words to express how a seemingly innocent dare had spiraled into a tangled web of emotions. Ariel nodded, and I could see she understood in a way I didn't expect. The night wore on, but my mind lingered on that moment. The game fizzled out as people grew weary, and eventually, we found ourselves sprawled on the basement floor, half-heartedly engaged in conversation. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I gathered enough courage to voice my discomfort to the group, hoping to lighten the tension that sat heavily in the air. I mentioned how that dare had stirred up feelings I didn't quite know how to handle, and as I spoke, I saw relief wash over Ariel's face. She must have sensed my need for validation, and when I finished rambling, she was quick to back me up, sharing her own feelings of discomfort over Aaron's boldness. Surprisingly, that shared experience opened a door between us. The others leaned in, listening intently. The laughter that previously filled the room morphed into a collective rumble of understanding, as everyone began to admit to their own moments of awkwardness during the game. I could see Aaron's smile falter, and for the first time that night, I witnessed genuine recognition of his thoughtlessness. Maybe it was the alcohol or just the moment, but feelings of camaraderie flooded our conversation, wrapping us all in its embrace. Some truths were spoken, some dares forgotten, but we connected that night on a deeper level than I ever anticipated. As we left Aaron's house, the night air was cool against my flushed cheeks, and the laughter echoed in my mind, a reminder that even in discomfort, there is a chance for clarity and understanding. Reflecting on it all, I realized that sometimes it takes a moment of absurdity to bring a group a little closer, to allow vulnerability to glitter beneath the surface. A few weeks later, when I saw Ariel again in English class, I noted a wave of reassurance as we exchanged knowing smiles, a small reminder of how that one chaotic game had shifted something within our circle. It had made me think about friendship and honesty in a new light. As I drifted to sleep that night, my heart felt lighter, knowing I wasn't alone in navigating these strange, growing feelings of adolescence. Ariel and I had forged an unlikely bond over a silly dare that taught us both something profound about ourselves and each other. It wasn't just another game, it was a pivotal moment in our lives that bridged into deeper connections and understanding. Anyone bold enough to kiss beneath the veil of a simple dare unknowingly opens the door to vast exploration of emotions, and sometimes that's all it takes for true friendship to flourish. Days passed, and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting an orange glow across the quiet suburban streets that felt both comforting and foreign at the same time. The laughter from our last game of Truth or Dare echoed in my mind like a favorite song, but it wasn't just the thrill of the game that lingered, it was the sensation of Ariel's lips brushing against mine, a fleeting moment that had somehow changed everything. I found myself looking forward to school again, not for the classes, but for the moments shared between us. It was in the cafeteria where Ariel and I sat together every day after that. Her laughter rang clear and bright, almost as if it had a life of its own. We talked about everything, our favorite books, the pressure of grades, and the silly crushes we had. But beneath the surface, a subtle shift was happening. The air seemed charged with anticipation, with unspoken words hanging heavily between us. During a particularly playful lunch, Ariel dared me to serenade her in front of our friends, and before I could think, I stood up, clearing my throat. With a mix of embarrassment and excitement, I improvised a silly love song that drew giggles from the group, but as I looked into her eyes, my heart raced, not just from the dares themselves but from how deeply I was beginning to care for her. That day, as we walked home, I couldn't shake the feeling that what had started as a game was growing into something wonderful, something complicated. Yet, with every shared laugh and every moment spent in her warm presence, doubts crept in. What if I misread the signals? What if, in trying to pursue this uncharted territory, I put our friendship at risk? Perhaps I should keep my feelings buried deep like one of those secrets you whisper into the softest corners of your mind. The turning point arrived on a Friday evening when a group of us gathered for another round of Truth or Dare. This time, it was different. There was an undercurrent of tension as whispers and teasing glances circulated. I found myself caught between wanting to participate and wanting to protect what I had with Ariel. When it was my turn, I took a breath, eyes darting toward Ariel's reassuring smile, and I chose Dare, hoping it might push the boundaries of our friendship just a little further. I dare you to call your biggest crush and confess your feelings. A friend blurted out, and the air thickened instantly. My heart sank, the dare echoed in my mind, reshaping my thoughts into a whirlpool of panic. My biggest crush was right in front of me, sitting just inches away, yet the idea of saying it aloud paralyzed me. Glancing at Ariel, my throat tightened. The group urged me on, the pressure swelling in my chest. I didn't want to make a fool of myself or ruin what we had, but what if this was an opportunity to clarify everything? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone, dialing without giving it one more thought. I could hear the ringing in my ears as Ariel shot me a questioning look, her eyes a mixture of support and confusion. Finally, a voice answered, fuzzy through my nerves. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my tone light, but all I could think about was Ariel's expectant gaze. I stumbled through the first few lines, but then as we reached an awkward silence, something shifted inside me. "Actually," I said, "you know what? I think I just made a mistake. Because there's someone I really like, and I think I should tell her. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it." I hung up, adrenaline pumping through my veins, and before I could collect myself, I turned to Ariel, whose mouth hung open in shock. I meant you," I blurted, the words tumbling out faster than I could catch them. The room went quiet, and finally, the silence broke, my friends stifling giggles while maintaining their conspiratorial whispers. Ariel's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, but her expression softened, confusion melting into understanding. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribcage, the weight of the moment pressing down on my shoulders. Time froze as we locked eyes, and suddenly it felt as if the walls around us had melted away, leaving just the two of us suspended in a cosmic bubble of anticipation. "Really?" she whispered, almost as if she were afraid to shatter the fragile canvas of this new reality. For a moment, I considered retreating, to erase my impulsive confession before it could lead to something bad, but instead, I found courage stirring within me. "Yeah, really," I replied, allowing my vulnerability to bridge the defining gap between us, where friendship and something deeper could meet. The air shifted, her nervous smile turned into a beaming one, and suddenly, the tension that had borne itself in that moment began to dissolve. We both laughed, the kind of laugh that radiates warmth, locking away uncertainty and cultivating a newfound depth to our relationship. That evening didn't end in a single dare, it spiraled into a torrent of honest conversations, dreams shared beneath the stars, and the unguarded joy of finally discovering connection. It changed the way we saw each other, not as just friends daring each other, but as two people brave enough to step beyond conventional boundaries, daring to embrace what lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, we navigated the delicate and uncharted territory of being more than friends, connecting not only through playful dares but genuine vulnerability in our interactions. Every stolen glance and nervous touch sent shivers through me, and gradually, the boundary that once defined our friendship melted away into something exquisite and gleaming. Ariel and I became partners in more than just games, we became partners in exploring the intricacies of young love, challenging ourselves to embrace what it meant to uncover intimacy while carrying the sweetness of youth on our shoulders. As the days turned into weeks, I realized that we had ventured beyond those initial trembling steps into a world rich with laughter, support, and understanding, teaching us both that every friendship has the potential to grow and evolve in the most unexpected ways, as long as we have the courage to dare. In retrospect, that game of truth or dare hadn't merely been a game, it became a transformative catalyst for our lives, pushing the edges of our hearts until they opened wide, inviting in the warmth of trust and affection. And just like that, we were no longer just players in a game, but co-authors of a tender story that was only just beginning. The weeks that followed that fateful night were nothing short of a whirlwind. The gravity of our dare had subtly shifted the dynamics of our group, and what was once a carefree circle of friends blossomed into something deeper and more intricate. Every Friday, we gathered at the old tree in my backyard, now a sanctuary of laughter and secrets. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden hues that danced through the branches, making the world feel like a secret haven. I could feel the change in the air, as conversations faded into soft smiles and longing glances exchanged between Ariel and me. It wasn't overt, but rather an unspoken agreement that lingered just beneath the surface. My heart was a patched quilt of excitement and anxiety as I started to wonder what it meant for us to redefine our friendship, to cross the boundaries laid out by childish innocence. One evening, with soft twilight surrounding us, Ariel dared me to share a secret, her tone playful but her eyes searching. My thoughts raced. It would have been easy to share something inconsequential, a quirky habit or an embarrassing moment, but the worry still lodged in my throat that our friendship would change irrevocably made me hesitate. Was I ready to lay my heart bare? Finally, I decided on the secret I had kept tucked away. I confessed how that kiss had shifted something inside me. The confession sprung forth timidly, as if it were a small bird breaking free from a cage. Ariel blinked slowly, absorbing my words, and a tender silence wrapped around us like a warm blanket. I held my breath, waiting for her response. After what felt like an eternity, her smile broke into the kind of radiance that filled the space between us with warmth. "I feel the same way," she replied, her voice a soft whisper caught in the evening breeze. Those simple words transformed the air around us, filling it with a sweet heaviness. A mix of relief and exhilaration engulfed me, and suddenly, the tremors of my previous doubts seemed trivial against the vastness of our connection. We moved closer, our shoulders brushing, creating a spark that ignited behind my ribs. The laughter of our friends in the distance faded, giving way to a cocoon of intimacy that felt both thrilling and terrifying. That night marked a pivot in our friendship. We began to confide in each other more, sharing dreams and fears over quiet conversations beneath the stars. In those moments of vulnerability, I discovered layers of Ariel I had never known, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her dreams of being a photographer, how she wrestled with self-doubt, and how she found solace in nature's quiet embrace. Life was starting to unveil its complexities, each layer revealing deeper shades of understanding and admiration. However, with the beauty of blossoming feelings also came complications. As the pressure of our new dynamic settled in, I worried with each passing day, what if this bond, so fragile and precious, fractured under the weight of expectations? I watched as our friends, including Jake and Lily, began to notice the subtle shift, their taunts and playful nudges serving as jarring reminders of our transformation. Each time they jokingly nudged us together, claiming we were dating, a prickle of anxiety shot through me. Were we ready for that? One Friday evening, Our group took a spontaneous trip to a local carnival, filled with laughter and tangled threads of joy. The air was saturated with the aroma of cotton candy and popcorn, a nostalgic scent I could hardly resist. As we walked through the throngs of people, my heart raced not just from the excitement of the carnival atmosphere but from the undeniable tension bubbling under the surface between Ariel and me. That night, the game we played took on a life of its own. It was no longer about childish dares but about truths we were unprepared to face amidst the laughter. After riding the Ferris wheel, we ended up in a quiet corner away from the jubilant crowd, and Luna, ever the instigator, suggested a game of truth or dare. I could sense the exhilaration dancing in the group as if everyone was holding their breath, unsure of what was to come. When it was my turn, I chose truth, contemplating whether to confront my emotions or cloak them in the comfort of playfulness. I could feel Ariel's gaze on me, searching, as if she, too, were taking stock of what was happening. "Do you have feelings for anyone in this group?" Jake asked, his eyes darting mischievously between us, igniting the familiar tension swirling around our little gang. Time seemed to stretch like taffy, and all the air left my chest. Struggling to breathe, I glanced at Ariel. The secret of our burgeoning feelings loomed over us like a dark cloud, and my heart raced at the thought of confessing what lay hidden beneath the surface. Looking into her eyes, I felt a sudden surge of courage. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady as I held her gaze. "I do." Ariel's breath caught, her eyes widening with surprise tinted with familiarity. The room buzzed with excitement and intrigue, yet it was as if the world around us faded into the background. "And who might that be?" Tara pressed eagerly. "I can't believe it's not me," she joked, but her laughter felt distant. "The truth is," I said, allowing the honesty of the moment to unfurl, "it's Ariel." The shock that settled in the air rippled through the circle, gasps escaping lips and laughter slightly fading as the weight of my confession danced across the charged atmosphere. Ariel's cheeks flushed a delicate shade of pink, and she searched my face for any sign of jest but instead found sincerity gleaming in my gaze. There, in the thick fog of uncertainty, our bond felt palpable, stepping from the shadows into a vibrant light, much like the emerging dawn. To my surprise, Ariel didn't shy away. Instead, she grinned, laughter bubbling up as if a wall of tension had dissolved between us. "I guess we're both in trouble then," she said, her smile wide, plunging us both into a newfound exhilaration that wove its way through our friends. As the last remnants of summer spilled into our lives, we navigated this fresh landscape of connection, our hearts dancing in harmony as we balanced between the playful thrill of the dare and the profound truth of our feelings. The carnival faded into memory, replaced by sleepy afternoons and quiet evenings wrapped in warmth, where we dared to venture further into each other's lives, sharing moments of sweetness, uncertainty, and a sprinkle of inevitable doubt. Months went by, a tender rhythm established beneath the guise of friendship, but as with any journey through uncharted territory, complications began to arise. I've learned that emotions aren't always kind. They can twist into something complicated, gnawing at confidence. We still played our games, but each dare felt heavy with expectation, our flirting becoming a tender dance on seemingly fragile ground. The fear of losing what we had made me hesitant, challenging me to balance what we wanted against the foundation we built. Then came an evening when I couldn't put it off any longer. Ariel and I found ourselves finally alone on the old tree swing, swaying slightly, reflecting on the shared laughter of the past few months. I turned to her, breathless. "What are we doing?" My voice broke softly against the stillness, and she met my gaze with an expression shimmering with understanding. "We're daring ourselves to be vulnerable," Ariel replied, her voice steady yet soft. We talked deep into the night, the stars shimmering above us, and it occurred to me, what began as simply a dare had evolved into something courageous and necessary. We had traversed the tender intricacies of friendship and intimacy, learning to embrace the duality of being both creators and caretakers of our story. In that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore. I wanted the story to continue, with all its complications and beauty, an intricate tapestry woven from our laughter, caution, and daring love. It was neither a clear-cut beginning nor a resolute ending, it was simply the unfolding of what we had dared to explore. Friendship matters, especially when it fosters love, and as dawn broke on the horizon that night, I felt an invigorating rush of certainty. Whatever came next, we would face it together, hand in hand, open to the wild and wonderful journey that lay ahead. And so, as I laid my head down that night, a smile lingered on my lips, breathing warmth into my dreams, knowing whatever shadows danced at the edges of our story would only serve to deepen the bond we had forged, the bond seated in a silly dare that had blossomed into a beautiful connection, as real and tender as we dared to believe it could be. I always thought of myself as a generous friend, the kind of person who'd go out of their way to make sure everyone around me felt included and cared for. But this one night, sitting across from Mia at our favorite Italian restaurant, I started to question everything about my kindness. It was supposed to be a simple catch-up dinner. We hadn't seen each other since the chaos of her breakup. As I sat across from her, sipping my water and picking at my risotto, I noticed how her eyes danced with excitement as she perused the menu. She started with a glass of wine, then quickly added an appetizer, followed by a main course that was twice the size of mine, and before I knew it, she was contemplating dessert like it was the only meal she'd eat for a week. My mind raced, and I tried to wrap my head around the idea of splitting the bill equally when it clearly wasn't equal at all. I felt a knot in my stomach. Would she expect me to foot the extra cost because she was having a tough time? Midway through her meal, Mia turned to me with a smile that was both captivating and vaguely suffocating. You know, you don't have to hold back on the spending. Just because I'm in a rough patch doesn't mean I can't enjoy a little splurge, I chuckled awkwardly, trying to brush off the awkward tension that simmered in the air. The thought of her expectation clung to me like an unwelcome guest. I had been there for her during the breakup, offering late-night phone calls and ice-cream-soaked evenings on the couch, but this felt different. As she savored her dessert, I couldn't ignore the mounting frustration. Why was it my responsibility to cover her choices? I contemplated saying something, but every time I opened my mouth, the words fizzled out. Instead, at the end of the meal when the check arrived, I took a deep breath, picked it up, and examined it with the intensity of a detective looking for clues. Mia, I said quietly, I think you ordered quite a bit more than I did, so I'd really prefer we split this based on what we each had. Silence thickened the air between us, and her eyes flashed briefly, confusion mingling with annoyance. Wow, really? I know things haven't been great, but you know I'm not trying to take advantage of you, right? I felt my face heat up. Deep down, I just wanted her to own her choices. But how do you say that to a friend without it sounding cold? Feeling vulnerable, I muttered an apology and paid my half, leaving a slightly awkward silence that lingered long after we parted ways. I drove home that night questioning if I had been an unreasonable jerk. Did standing my ground make me the villain in this friendship? The emotional whiplash gnawed at me, leaving me unsettled. A few days later, there was a text from Mia. Hey, I felt really bad about how I reacted at dinner. I guess I was just trying to enjoy myself, but I should have considered how it would come across. Relief washed over me, but it didn't completely erase the discomfort. I typed a quick reply, letting her know I appreciated her message and understood where she was coming from. Still, the underlying tension lingered in the back of my mind. What did that dinner really mean for our friendship? In the end, I chose to believe I wasn't in the wrong. I needed to stand my ground, after all, even if it came at the cost of a little discomfort. Even now, when gatherings with friends come up, I hesitate over the check at the end, a tiny ripple of anxiety reminding me of that night. But maybe, just maybe, it was a necessary lesson on boundaries and understanding. One little dinner shaped my perspective in ways I never anticipated. I found myself replaying the events of that evening over and over. It was a simple enough dinner, really, a casual meet-up to catch up on life, just the two of us, at that cozy little Italian place we loved. The laughter and easy conversation flowed naturally at first, like it always did. We reminisced about college years, the ridiculous antics of our late-night study sessions. I even managed to muster up the courage to broach the subject of the latest guy she was dating, her eyes lighting up as she described him. But as our plates cleared and the night wore on, the tone shifted just a bit. She, vibrant and enthusiastic, seemed to let the moment carry her a little too far. Let's order dessert, she'd said, her eyes glinting with excitement. I nodded enthusiastically, not wanting to dampen her spirit. We shared a slice of rich tiramisu, layers of coffee-soaked sponge and creamy mascarpone. It was heavenly, and I had no regrets. But then she casually suggested we grab another one, and before I knew it, our waiter was hurrying back to our table with yet another dessert. The check arrived, and I felt my stomach knot. It had jumped up to a shockingly high number. I chewed on my lower lip, glancing at the bill while she was still blissfully absorbed in her dessert. I'll get this one, I said, quickly calculating how much her extra choice would add up to my share. When she turned and smiled, her fork paused mid-air, I felt a rush of annoyance rise in me. Wait, are you serious? You want me to cover your half? That was when things went a little sideways. She shrugged unapologetically, her casual demeanor doing nothing to soothe the tension in my chest. Come on, We can split the dessert. It's only fair. But it felt wrong, like she was assuming my generosity was inexhaustible just because we were friends. I froze, emotions twisting in my stomach. Was I being selfish? Was it about money, or was there something deeper here? We both worked similar jobs, but her recent trips and excessive spending on shoes and other luxuries loomed in my mind. I had to think of my own budget too, especially after I had recently decided to save for a trip I had always wanted to take. Eventually, I moved past it. No, I can't cover that. I'm good, but this was your choice, I said firmly, my voice steady, but I could tell my resolve surprised her. She frowned, her smile fading, and for a moment, I thought I caught a glimmer of disappointment. You'd really make me pay for my own dessert? She replied, the tone now tinged with something sharper than mere surprise. I thought we were friends. Friends share everything, I sighed, frustration bubbling just below the surface. We do, but not everything is fair game. I'm not okay with paying for something I didn't eat. The silence in the air between us felt heavy, almost suffocating. The laughter that had filled our previous conversations drifted away, leaving behind an awkward tension that both of us were too stubborn to break. I could feel the weight of my decision, and as the server returned, I forced myself to say, let's split the bill then. I didn't want an argument, I wanted my friend back. She nodded curtly, and I swiped my card, feeling the sting of the moment settle like a stone in my gut. Even in the days that followed, it's like I was reading subtext where there was none. Texts were slow to arrive, and when they did, they felt less charged with warmth than before. It gnawed at me because, deep down, I cared about her. I found myself grappling with my own emotions. Was I justified in standing my ground, or had I pushed her away in the process? Finally, a week later, she invited me to a group outing with friends. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for another check dilemma, but I missed her too much to decline. As the night unfolded, I braced myself for the awkwardness that might arise. But then, something unexpected happened. There we were, surrounded by mutual friends, and she got up to make a toast. To friendships, both the easy and the hard, and to learning what it means to share. I'm grateful for every miscommunication that teaches me what really matters. Her eyes flickered toward me, and my heart clenched. Did she mean that? I couldn't make sense of the words swirling in my mind, so instead, I raised my glass to her. To being honest, and figuring things out as we go. The group laughed, and, for the first time in days, the tension between us felt like a thread weaving its way back together. Now, as our friendship continues to grow, there's still that tiny ripple of anxiety when it comes to sharing bills, but it's been a lesson. I reevaluate what generosity means, not just for others, but for myself as well. With every dinner outing, I aim to balance giving with being guarded, setting boundaries while still cherishing the moments we have. And who knows? Maybe it's not about who pays for what at the end of each meal but about the conversations we'd fill those moments with. I can't deny that the unease of that dinner still lingers in the background, but it's like a shadow I've learned to accept rather than fear. When Elena texted me again, suggesting we grab lunch at our favorite cafe, my heart did a little dance of excitement and anxiety. I could picture the sun streaming through the windows as we settled into our usual corner table, a cozy nook filled with mismatched chairs and a menu bursting with options. The day arrived, and as I walked in, the smell of fresh brewed coffee enveloped me. Elena was already there, twirling a strand of hair around her finger, a smile lighting up her face. We exchanged our usual pleasantries, and I could feel the past wash away like the fleeting aroma of cinnamon in the air. We fell into easy conversation, sharing stories about our week, the highs, the lows, the mundane details that made us feel alive. It felt good, familiar, like slipping into an old pair of shoes, worn but so comfortable. Then came the time to order. I knew I was being cautious as I scanned the menu, mentally calculating prices, almost hyper-aware of how much a salad versus a rich, creamy pasta dish would cost. The last thing I wanted was to relive that evening at the Italian bistro. When the waiter arrived, I opted for a simple sandwich and water. There was a flicker of worry when I noticed Elena, gleefully pointing to the burger, loaded with extras, and the decadent chocolate cake she insisted on getting for dessert. Come on. Live a little, she teased, nudging my shoulder playfully. I forced a grin, but inside, I couldn't help feeling that familiar tension creeping back. As we ate, every delicious bite of her burger seemed to weigh on my mind. Did I seem cheap for not indulging like she did? Should I even care? We talked about everything, plans for the weekend, her new project at work, and my recent obsession with gardening, while I tried to focus less on the bill that would eventually come. But deep down, I started to feel that knot of resentment again. Why do I always have to be the one drawing the line? Isn't friendship supposed to be about sharing joy, not just money? After we polished off the last bite of cake, Elena insisted I share with her, saying it'd be a crime not to indulge in dessert together. I felt a pang of guilt for not just letting loose and enjoying the moment. But when the bill arrived, I braced myself. I scanned the total, and my heart sank. It was more than I'd budgeted for. I barely had money left for groceries this week. I took a breath, feeling the tension mix with guilt. Okay, look, I'll cover my part, I said this as nonchalantly as I could, trying to maintain that light-hearted spirit our lunch had encapsulated, even as my nerves unraveled. Elena frowned, her brow furrowing a bit. Seriously? You know I wanted to treat you today, right? It's just lunch. A part of me felt relieved at her insistence, even if it stirred something deeper. I know, and I appreciate it. But really, I'd prefer to split it this time. I'm tight on cash this month. She paused, her expression softening as if she finally understood. Got it. I was just having fun and wanted to celebrate our friendship, you know? I felt a rush of warmth. We can still celebrate without spending too much, right? Her eyes sparkled, right. It's about us, not the money. In that moment, everything clicked. We weren't just friends balancing bills, we were two individuals learning to navigate the complexities of generosity and boundaries together. The anxiety still flickered at the back of my mind, but now it felt different, like a reminder to keep communication open and honest. As we finished up, we walked outside into the crisp afternoon air, laughing over who would win in a race to the nearby park. I realized how freeing it was to keep the conversation light and tethered to experiences rather than expenses. Maybe this was the real lesson. It's okay to set my boundaries while still savoring the joy of connection. Sure, there would still be bumps along the way, and those small ripples of anxiety might never fully dissipate, but I was learning to ride the waves instead of letting them drown me. And sometimes, amidst the laughter and love, that was enough. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. You have to promise not to judge, he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. I'm not who you think I am. It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. We know who he is. He's a wanted man. My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately. searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care, who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience, or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sob spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself." Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, he was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, what we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered, I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward: I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, he learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight. Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. "I want to be better." His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. "No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding," I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. I never expected to find myself at odds with my family over something as simple as a door. Living alone in a small apartment, I had carved out my little sanctuary, a place where I could escape the world's chaos and indulge in quiet moments with a good book or a long, hot shower. It was my haven, and after the relentless demands of work and social events that filled my calendar, I often craved solitude. That's why, when my aunt and uncle decided to drop by unannounced last Saturday, I felt a rush of anxiety flood through me like ice water. I had barely returned from a stressful week at the office, 2 deadlines looming over me like dark clouds, and the last thing I needed was an unexpected visit. When I heard the persistent knock on my door, my heart sank. Every part of my being screamed to ignore it, to hunker down with some takeout and let the world fade away. They were the kind of relatives who wouldn't take no for an answer, and I had a pretty good idea that they wouldn't be content with a quick pleasantry at the door before moving on. I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind racing. What if they couldn't see how tired I was? Just duck into the kitchen and hope they give up, I thought, but the knocking intensified, almost urgent. I took a deep breath and, against my better judgment, I opened the door just a crack, enough to catch a glimpse of their expectant faces. The look of surprise on my uncle's face morphed into disappointment as he realized I wasn't prepared for their visit. "Oh, hey. We thought we'd stop by. It's been ages," he exclaimed, as if time bent and twisted in some miraculous way to make their interruption appropriate. I felt the corners of my mouth twitch with nerves. "Hi, yeah, sorry. I didn't know you were coming," I stammered, avoiding their eager gazes. The truth was, I was overwhelmed, tired, and bleeding introversion that day. The warmth of my community sometimes felt like a suffocating blanket rather than a comforting embrace. I wanted to say, "I love you both, but could you please just text first next time?" Instead, I just stood there while they continued to chatter about their week like I should be all ears. In amidst their dialogue, my thoughts spiraled. Am I being unreasonable? Am I really the boss of my own space, or have I lost touch with what family means? I scanned the apartment and realized my living room looked like a tornado had swept through. Mismatched socks strewn on the floor, a half-eaten slice of pizza languishing on the coffee table, definitely not the kind of setting I wanted to showcase. I knew they would judge, not that they meant to, but from experience, I knew my aunt's disapproving eyebrow would only rise higher the longer I stood there. "You have a minute?" she asked, as they pushed their way inside, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions brewing inside me. "Actually, I'm really in the middle of something," I mumbled, my voice barely more than a whisper. But my attempt to stand my ground fell flat. Family members don't generally take those kinds of refusals on face value. And, like a slow-burning fuse, resentment began to ignite. I felt trapped between my genuine care for them and my desperate need for peace. The unease spun into a knot in my stomach. Was I the bad guy for wanting to protect my own mental space? They began to settle in, invading my sanctuary with their animated banter, laying their jackets on my couch, leaning over to inspect my bookshelves as if they were an exhibit. It dawned on me that they had no clue how much I longed for solitude at that moment, how important those quiet Saturday afternoons were for my sanity. The more they laughed and caught up, the more distant I felt, like a spectator in my own life. I remembered countless Sunday dinners when spontaneity put a smile on my face, but this one was different. A part of me wanted to just fold into their warmth, to let the walls come down, but the other part was desperate for a clean break from the world outside. Finally, after an hour of small talk filled with casual questions about my work and my love life, or lack thereof, I mustered the courage to intervene, gently asserting, "Hey, I really appreciate you guys stopping by, but I'm feeling a bit exhausted. Can we catch up another time?" Their cheerful expressions faltered, disappointment clouding their faces. "Oh, but we came all this way," my aunt began, her voice dropping an octave, inscribing guilt deeper into the fabric of my resolve. "That's the thing about family, sometimes, even love can carry an expectation, an unspoken demand that feels heavier than steel." As they finally gathered their things, I felt a mix of relief and guilt gnawing at my insides. Had I overstepped? Was I too harsh in my execution? I closed the door behind them, their voices fading down the hall, questioning my choices like fair-minded jurors. Hours passed, and I sat cross-legged on the floor amidst the chaos of my living space, letting the internal battle wane. The authenticity of my emotions washed over me in waves. Maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe needing alone time wasn't some personal failing. But the lingering question echoed in my mind, would they see it that way? In the days that followed, I texted my aunt to suggest we meet for coffee later in the week. "I'm sorry I wasn't up for a visit, work has been a lot," I wrote, hoping to bridge the chasm. I saw her reply flash on the screen, "No worries, we'll plan something. We miss you." Part of me sighed in relief, while another part knew this was just the beginning of a longer conversation about boundaries, connection, and the balance of family. Because in the end, maybe it wasn't about being right or wrong, perhaps it was about understanding each other's needs without sacrificing one's own peace. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to do both. That interaction with my mom lingered in my mind for days. I took that moment to reflect on our relationship, something I had been avoiding for far too long. I never intended to be the estranged family member. I simply found myself caught in the whirlwind of adult life, work obligations, personal goals, and the day-to-day chaos that came with it. But their way of expressing love felt overwhelming at times, like a tidal wave crashing over me. I set aside my phone and gazed out the window, watching as leaves scattered in the wind, twisting and turning in ways that reminded me of the often erratic nature of our family dynamics. My family had long adopted a policy of drop by unannounced, a tradition I found charming at first but now felt like an intrusion into my carefully curated solitude. I appreciated the effort, truly, but I questioned whether they understood that my home was my sanctuary, a place I needed to recharge away from the world's demands. The guilt of not being who they wanted me to be crept in like an unwanted guest, taunting me with thoughts of how they must perceive my distance. Yet, I had never felt more like myself than I did now, navigating my boundaries. It didn't take long for that uneasy tension to rise again when Thomas, my brother, suggested a weekend visit. I braced myself, knowing that I'd be the odd one out at the dinner table, dishing out platitudes while my family laughed over nostalgic stories, all while I hovered over my thoughts like a wallflower at a party. This time, though, I felt a tug, a mix of obligation and desire to maintain that connection, even if it was strained. "Hey, can we chat about when you guys come?" I typed hesitantly, deciding to voice my concerns before the weekend arrived. I didn't want another instance of family craziness that left me feeling frazzled and misunderstood. A short reply came back, "What's up? We're excited to see you." I swallowed hard. There was that sense of enthusiasm again, crackling through the screen as if I were there with them. Maybe it was an opportunity for understanding, or perhaps it would swing like a pendulum back to my fears of rejection. Saturday morning drapes the house in a hazy light, and the doorbell pierces through the quiet like a gunshot. My heart races as I stand in the middle of the living room, frozen in place, and the moment stretches into eternity. Hand clenched around the doorknob, I hesitated, considering the possibility of peeling back the layers of silence, of explaining that I craved acceptance of my choices, my pace, my space. Instead, I took a deep breath and unlocked the door, plastering on a smile that I hope didn't betray any anxiety. Their startled faces morphed into grins, and the warmth of their presence filled the hallway, intoxicating and overwhelming all at once. "We brought your favorite." My mom held up a blueberry pie, and for a fleeting second, the sweetness of nostalgia wrapped around me like a hug, but the tension brewed just beneath. I invited them in, trying desperately to hold on to the comfort while wrestling with unease. As they settled in like they owned the place, the conversations rushed and tumbled over each other, but every sound felt amplified, a cacophony of expectation, love, and my desire for silence. I knew I had to seize this moment to lay bare my feelings. "You know," I started, my voice shaking slightly, "I appreciate these spontaneous visits, I really do, but sometimes I just need a little heads up." They halted, all eyes on me, surprise etched across their faces. My stomach knotted, and I can hardly bear the silence that ensued. But then, slowly, my brother nodded while my mom frowned slightly, a wrinkle of puzzlement forming on her forehead. "Oh, honey, we didn't know you felt that way," she whispered, her voice softening. A flicker of hope ignited in me. The moment hung in the air, heavy yet tender, and in that silence, acceptance danced delicately among us, paving a newfound path. As the afternoon rolled on, we spoke more openly, the conversation bridged gaps I feared would swallow me whole. They acknowledged my need for space, and slowly, we carved out a rhythm that allowed for both connection and solitude. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the blue sky igniting in a riot of orange and pink hues, we had not only shared laughter and stories but also something even more precious, understanding. I sat back, quietly content, relishing the newfound balance of knowing that love could be given without drowning, that boundaries didn't have to mean isolation, and yes, that my voice mattered in the symphony of our family. As I waved goodbye, my heart felt a little lighter, and I realized this was just the beginning, not just for them, but for me, a dance toward that ever-elusive harmony between connection and self-care. As I watched their car disappear down the winding road, clarity washed over me. I had navigated so many emotional landmines recently, battling guilt and resentment while trying to figure out where I fit into this intricate web of familial love and obligations. I couldn't help but smile. Maybe it wasn't about asserting myself with brash words or avoidance anymore, it was about conversing, sharing space, and, most importantly, communicating my needs without feeling like I was the villain. I felt like I was finally shedding the layers of guilt that had wrapped around me like a heavy blanket for years. The next week, I decided to open a dialogue with my siblings during our regular Sunday video call. The cozy backdrop of my living room, with its soft, ambient lighting, felt like a good setting for what I hoped would be an honest discussion. As we chatted, I could feel my heart racing a little. My brother started talking about an upcoming family reunion, throwing numbers and dates at me as if I was sitting on the edge of a precipice. The old urge to either withdraw or placate them bubbled up. "Hold on a minute," I finally found my voice and said. "I really appreciate that you guys want to include me, but I've been feeling overwhelmed with everything." The screen filled with thoughtful faces as I tried to find the right words. "I love you all, and I want to be part of this, but I also need time for myself. If I push myself to show up for everything, I won't be able to show up at all," I confessed. Silence followed, a rare occurrence. I could see my sister's brow furrowing, and I worried I'd said too much. Then, slowly, her expression softened. "I get that," she said. "We want you to take care of yourself. You're not being selfish. You're human." That simple acknowledgement felt like a life buoy tossed my way when I had been treading water trying to keep everyone else afloat. One by one, they shared. They talked about their own struggles balancing social events and the pressure to conform to family expectations. As I listened, something shifted in the energy of our call, an empathic exchange that filled the gaps I had felt before. Each realization we shared breathed new life into our connection. By the end of that hour, I felt more heard and understood than I had in years. The weight of expectation lifted a little more off my chest, replaced by a reassuring warmth. Maybe they did see me and my struggles after all. Weeks turned into months, and I began to reshape not just my boundaries but our collective family dynamics. I found peace in saying what I needed, be it declining an invitation or suggesting a smaller gathering over a chaotic family event. Surprisingly, changes rippled through us. My siblings began to vocalize their own needs more openly, and in a way, we all started forging a richer, more authentic relationship. In realizing my own boundaries, I inadvertently encouraged them to explore theirs. Looking back, it's funny how that initial hesitation to open the door to unannounced visitors had been a pivotal moment. I didn't shut them out, I just showed them I needed space, a new boundary. It wasn't a rejection, it was a request for understanding. Life with family wasn't about keeping score or avoiding conflict, it was about building a comfortable home in each other's hearts, however imperfect the walls might be. And here I am, on the edge of another sunset, wondering what the future holds for us all, MacGuffins of emotion and history mingling with reverberations of laughter and love. I can feel the promise of more conversations ahead that will continue to carve out our path as we venture toward a fuller, more nuanced version of family. It's not a perfect resolution, but it's a hopeful beginning, one day at a time. I never thought I would find myself in a situation where I'd have to question my friendship with Jenna, but here we are. It all started innocently enough. We met in college, two awkward freshmen navigating the maze of dorm life together. Our friendship flourished as we shared late-night study sessions fueled by pizza and too many energy drinks, laughably bonding over our failed attempts at dating. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. I started throwing small get-togethers, just 8 or 10 of us, mostly to celebrate milestones like birthdays or just the fact that it was Friday. But there was something about Jenna's attendance at these parties that began to weigh on my mind. She would show up, of course, always dressed to the nines, charming the other guests with her vivacious energy. But as the night wore on, there was a familiar script. She'd monopolize conversations, drifting from one group to another, leaving a wake of uneasy tension. I'd try to steer her away from making crass jokes about our friends, and more than once, I found myself making half-hearted excuses to distance myself from her antics. It reached a point where I dreaded sending out those invites, knowing that Jenna would show up and overshadow everything with her loud laughter, often aimed at jabs that didn't sit well with anyone. One evening, after another party where I spent too much time apologizing for her behavior, I finally broke down. I texted her, a decision that felt monumental, a mix of fear and relief swirling in my stomach. "Hey, I think I need to take a step back from inviting you to parties. It's just hard to manage things when you're there." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing as I waited for her response. The three bubbles floated for what felt like an eternity before her message came back, sharp and cold. Wow. I can't believe you'd say that. I felt this strange mixture of guilt and empowerment flood through me. Was I the asshole for wanting to reclaim my space, my friendships, my peace of mind? The days that followed were awkward. I avoided larger friend groups fearing that the conversation would come back to Jenna, and I tiptoed around mutual friends who seemed torn between us. Jenna didn't reach out. It felt like I'd taken a match to a bridge I didn't want to burn but had no choice in doing so. But then, one night, I received a simple text from a mutual friend. She was wondering if I wanted to grab coffee. I hesitated at first, but curiosity won me over. Over steaming mugs, she shared Jenna's side. Apparently, Jenna felt isolated and hurt, convinced that everyone loved her except me. I hadn't noticed she'd been going through some personal stuff, and all the over-the-top antics had been an attempt to mask her vulnerability. I felt a pang of regret, mixed with the thought that maybe I hadn't handled the situation in the best way. I reached out to Jenna, just an olive branch of sorts, keeping it light, suggesting we go out for drinks and talk. The conversation was awkward, yet as we spoke, I realized we both had missed the mark with each other. I shared my perspective, and she showed me hers. Looking back, I'm still not sure if I was entirely in the right or if I was actually being an asshole. I learned that sometimes friendships require deeper conversations and understanding instead of ultimatums. We've been trying to rebuild a foundation, one conversation at a time, hopefully forging a new path forward with a little more grace and a lot more empathy. I remember the first time we truly sat down to talk, the clink of ice in our glasses echoing in the small booth wedged against the back wall of that bar. It felt almost surreal, like characters in a movie on the brink of reconciliation. I could sense the tension weaving between us, a taut string just waiting to snap under the weight of our histories and miscommunications. She looked different in the dim bar light, her usually guarded expression softened by the flickering candle between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the emotional tug-of-war ahead. I just didn't see it coming, I said, hoping my words would take root in a space where we could finally meet in the middle. Every party I threw, you seemed withdrawn. I could feel my excitement dimming when I saw you on the edge of the crowd, not really engaging with anyone. She leaned back, visibly grappling with my words. Well, you never asked me how I felt about it, did you? Her voice had that familiar, soft edge of vulnerability that I'd come to recognize, a hint of frustration layered within. It felt like you were trying to appease the group, and I was just part of the decoration. I frowned at her choice of word, decoration. Without thinking, I blurted, I didn't mean to treat you like an accessory. I noticed a flicker of hurt flash across her face, and I quickly backtracked. I just thought we were going through the motions together. I wanted to share good times, she sighed deeply, fingers tracing the condensation pooling on her glass. I see that now. But sometimes, it felt like you were more interested in being the host than being my friend, like you needed a perfect party, and I was just an extra. Those words hit hard. I wanted to argue, to insist that my intentions had been true, but I paused, allowing her feelings to seep in. It dawned on me that maybe I had been so focused on creating the perfect social atmosphere that I'd lost sight of what really mattered, connection. The conversation rolled into the night, bouncing between minor grievances and heartfelt sentiments, the awkwardness gradually giving way to genuine understanding. I learned how she viewed our friendship, the highs and lows she felt in the backdrop of my social life. Between laughter and serious revelations, there was a palpable sense of repair in the air. It wasn't perfect, there were still silences that hung like clouds, full of unsaid things, and sometimes the guilt would eat away at me when I thought of those evenings where her laughter felt distant. Yet, as the hours passed, I felt something shift. We weren't where we had been before, but maybe we didn't have to be. The next few months were a delicate dance of rebuilding, peppered with coffee dates and book exchanges instead of parties. Our conversations deepened, touching not just on the light topics but on dreams, failures, and everything in between. I remember one late afternoon, sitting in a cafe where the sunlight danced on the floor like an old friend, she confessed she struggled with vulnerability. I matched her honesty by admitting that I had a habit of ghosting the deeper emotions, preferring to sidestep anything that felt too heavy or complicated. It was in those moments of shared truth that I started to see that my approach could be problematic, stunted. No more half-hearted invites to gatherings and overlooking how her absence echoed in my life. I committed to including her, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to nurture our relationship. Still, I couldn't shake that lingering question from our first talk. Was I the asshole for needing to set boundaries, or was it my fault for not recognizing the friendship was fraying? Perhaps it was a bit of both, a complex tapestry woven with missteps and misunderstandings. Ultimately, it was clear that the journey to mend our friendship was more about understanding than assigning blame. And while I didn't know where we might end up, the path forward felt much clearer each time we shared a moment together, each new memory a building block toward something stronger. So here we are, navigating this space with more grace and empathy, discovering that perhaps the true test of friendship isn't in our moments of success but the nuances of our failures, learning to forgive not just each other but ourselves, one conversation at a time. One of those pivotal moments came just a week later, after an unexpectedly rainy Saturday kept me cooped up at home. I had just settled onto my couch, a pile of takeout boxes littering the coffee table, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jess. "Want to take a walk? I have something to talk about." My stomach flipped. I didn't want to overanalyze the invitation, but instinctively I knew that this wasn't just about a stroll in our favorite park. I felt both apprehension and a tingling sense of hope as I replied with a simple, "Sure. Just give me a few." As we walked side by side, the clouds hanging low above us, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and new beginnings, Jess broke the silence first. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I realized I've been so focused on feeling excluded that I didn't see how my actions contributed to the mess we found ourselves in." The sincerity in her voice pierced through the tension that had lingered between us since our last heart-to-heart. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a weight lift just from her honesty. Yeah, and for me, it was about feeling unheard, like my frustrations didn't matter. It wasn't about the parties, but about feeling like my feelings were being brushed off. I guess I was tired of making excuses for why I needed boundaries. The words spilled from me, as if I was finally allowing myself to breathe and let the air of vulnerability flow freely between us. "I never wanted you to feel left out, but it feels like every time I extended an invitation, you were going through your own thing. I didn't know how to reach you." Jess nodded solemnly, her brow furrowing in thought. "I see that now. I was dealing with my own issues, stress at work, family stuff, but I didn't realize I was shutting you out. I thought I was protecting myself, you know?" There was a pause as we stopped beneath the swaying branches of an old oak tree. The wind rustled its leaves, mirroring the turbulence of our unresolved emotions. "I missed you, I really did," she continued, her voice softer now, more delicate, like the moment itself. "I guess I just didn't know how to reach out without feeling ashamed." I took a deep breath, feeling the sincerity of her words wrapping around my heart like a hug. "We're in this together, Jess. I don't want you to feel ashamed of needing space. But we have to communicate, stop dancing around issues. We owe each other the honesty, even when it feels uncomfortable." Armed with a new mutual understanding, we began to talk more openly about our expectations. Sure, there were discussions about plans, but also about our emotional landscapes, our worries, and dreams. We started meeting not just during events in the community but for the little things, coffee on lazy Sundays, movie nights where we'd laugh over outdated films, moments that glimmered brighter than any party we had ever hosted. The rebuilding wasn't smooth, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. Sometimes we'd slip back into old habits, forgetting to check in with each other. But with each misstep, each awkward text or accidental silence, we would remind ourselves that growth isn't a straight line. It's more of a sprawling web of mistakes and little triumphs, golden threads weaving us tighter. Months passed, and while our friendship wasn't wholly restored, it felt reborn, like a flower stubbornly blooming through asphalt, resilient and beautiful. I realized that it was okay not to have all the answers, to not put an official label on our bond just yet. What mattered was the journey we navigated together, filled with more understanding. And even in silence, we were learning to be okay. One day, at a small gathering at another friend's house, I caught Jess's eye across the crowded room. She raised her glass, a smile blooming on her face. That simple gesture felt monumental, like we had said so much without uttering a single word. Looking back now, I think about the precarious balance of friendships and how vulnerability, when shared, can create something beautiful from chaos. Sometimes, all it takes to mend a frayed connection is acknowledging our imperfections and extending the grace to learn together. And as I stand on this winding path, uncertain of where it leads, I feel a new sense of resilience alongside Jess, a promise that we would continue to navigate the hard conversations, weaving our laughter and heartaches into the intricate tapestry of our friendship one day at a time. Confession: I am so desperate to be seen naked, so I go to saunas. It feels strange to admit this, but it's the truth that's been burrowing itself deeper into my mind with each passing day. I grew up feeling invisible, always blending into the wallpaper of my life, and as I moved into adulthood, that sense of anonymity settled uncomfortably within me. I work in a corporate office where everyone wears the same bland suits, and despite my attempts to connect with my coworkers, I often feel like a ghost, drifting through the hallways unnoticed. The idea of being seen, truly seen, without the barrier of clothing, began as a whisper in the back of my mind during one of those long, disheartening days at work. After overhearing a few colleagues share stories about their trips to a local sauna, where they'd experienced an exhilarating sense of liberation, I decided to find a place and give it a try myself. The first time I stepped into the sauna, my heart was racing, not just from the heat enveloping me like a warm blanket, but from the thrill of stepping outside my comfort zone. I had chosen the hour when it's typically quieter, just me and the relief of the steam filling the space, the sound of water softly bubbling in the corner. I cautiously peeled off my towel, each moment feeling like a revelation, as I sat there, the heat seeping into my skin, electrifying my senses. With my eyes closed, I could almost believe I was invisible, like a part of the soothing steam that wrapped around me. The first few visits were largely uneventful, just contemplative time alone in a shared space, but it soon became clear to me that there was tension brewing underneath my seemingly innocent nudity. I realized that what I truly craved was not just the warmth of the sauna but the comfort of being openly vulnerable, stripped of societal expectations and judgments. I watched individuals come and go, their conversations floating around me, laughter spilling over easily, creating an inviting atmosphere that I had never felt before in my corporate life. Then came the turning point, an unexpected encounter with a woman named Elena. She entered one day, radiating confidence and ease, and immediately captured my attention without saying a word. She settled across from me, the soft light reflected in the steam floating around us, and as I caught her gaze, I felt the gravity of my own vulnerability. I longed for her approval, her attention, thinking that perhaps this was what I had been seeking all along, affirmation in the starkness of our nakedness. We shared some small talk, the pleasantries of strangers slowly blossoming into something more intimate over the weeks. With each conversation, I found myself more drawn to her, but also more terrified of the vulnerability I was exposing. My thoughts spiraled, wondering if she saw me as I wished to be seen or simply another body in the steam. The emotional swell of confusion and desire became exhausting. I enjoyed our chats deeply, yet held the shame of my intentions just under the surface, pondering if I was chasing this connection or merely hiding behind my longing for attention. As the weeks rolled on, I noticed that every visit became a mix of dread and excitement. My chest would tighten as I approached the sauna entrance, the prospect of encountering Elena twisting my insides like the steam swirling around me. On one particularly humid afternoon, I took my place beside her, the air charged with unsaid words and unacknowledged feelings, our bodies so close yet worlds apart. There was a fragility in the air, and it struck me then, how desperately I craved to leave my mark on this life, to be more than a nameless figure fading into the background. That day, amidst the soft drumming of my heart and the subtle scent of eucalyptus enveloping us, I confessed to Elena my struggles with invisibility, the anxiety of being overlooked in life, and, most fearfully, my unacknowledged desperation for validation. I spoke with a rawness I hadn't anticipated, spilling my truths like the sweat beating on my skin. To my surprise, Elena didn't recoil. Instead, she shared her own experiences, admitting that she, too, had felt the loneliness of being misunderstood and the joy found in being seen, not only by others but by herself. We talked for hours, our walls melting away along with the sauna's heat, unveiling not just our vulnerability but a meaningful connection that provided solace and strength. In retrospect, I realized that it was never about the nakedness or the sauna itself, it was about the courage to be seen, truly seen, and for once in my life, I felt a spark of clarity. I found freedom in vulnerability, and the comforting notion that seeking connection, while fraught with uncertainty, can yield the most extraordinary transformations. In the days that followed, my visits became less about mere exposure and more about self-acceptance and the burgeoning friendship I had with Elena. No longer was I the desperate individual solely yearning for attention, rather, I embraced my intersectionality of longing and companionship. We continued to meet, spending lazy afternoons wrapped in the comfort of our thoughts, but now, it infused with laughter and a shared understanding. The sauna, once a symbol of my vulnerabilities, had transformed into a sacred space of connection and healing. Update: a few months have passed since those revealing confessions in that steamy sanctuary, and I'm happy to report that Elena and I have grown much closer. We even explored the possibility of a romantic relationship, stepping into a world where intimacy flourishes and being seen as an everyday luxury rather than a rare obligation. I'm still learning to embrace my nakedness, not only in the physical sense but emotionally as well, and I find solace knowing that opening myself up to someone else has yielded greater rewards than I initially sought. The sauna has become our special haven, gradually shifting from a symbol of desperation to one of hope and companionship. It remains a vibrant reminder that the quest to be seen can lead to beautiful connections and unexpected transformations. Looking back over the last few months, I realize how far I've come, how those tense moments spent alone in the sauna have morphed into shared laughter and gentle conversations that flow like the steam that envelops us. Marcus, my newfound companion in this intimate journey, has changed the way I perceive not only my own nakedness but also the vulnerability that comes with allowing someone else into those raw spaces of my life. When we first met, it was just me, sitting quietly, wrapped in the warmth of the cedar walls, eyes closed, my mind wandering to all the causes of my insecurities, the memories of feeling invisible in crowds, of being a spectator in my own life. Then came the day he slid open the heavy door, steam curling into the air like whispers of hidden secrets, and settled down beside me. His presence was unexpected, yet there was a calming assurance in the way he carried himself. We exchanged a few pleasantries, both wrapped in our towels, sharing shy smiles, but there was an undercurrent of drawn tension, the kind that happens when you sense that your life is about to shift in an undeniable way. With each visit, we found ourselves gravitating closer to one another, our separate journeys of discovery weaving a tapestry of shared experiences that grew richer with every passing hour. As the weeks passed, our conversations developed from nervous giggles and banalities into deeper discussions about life, dreams, and fears. I learned that Marcus, too, had been seeking liberation, that he had spent years suffocated by the expectations of others, the weight of carefully constructed facades. Our private sanctuary became a place where the disrobing of clothes was merely the beginning. It was in shedding our emotional armor, the layers of pretense, that we truly began to flourish. In the gentle heat of the sauna, we learned to respect each other's boundaries, to explore the outlines of our souls without rushing into intimacy, allowing the space for trust to develop at its own pace. Once, after a particularly profound conversation, when I spoke about my childhood struggles, Marcus took my hand in his and squeezed it gently, a simple gesture that conveyed understanding more profoundly than words ever could. In those moments, I realized that the desperation I once felt to be seen merely stripped away layers of armor. What I truly craved was connection, understanding, and love in its purest forms. It was during a twilight evening at the sauna, the world outside fading into a whisper of cool air contrasted against the steamy warmth inside, that everything shifted. Surrounded by the musky scent of eucalyptus and soft flickering light, we made a pact, not just for the two of us but also to continue this newfound exploration with others. The brave act of being naked in front of one another became a metaphor for the kind of vulnerability and openness we wanted to cultivate not only in our growing affection but in our interactions with the outside world. Inspired by the freedom we found together, we began inviting others to join us in these discussions, people from our lives who struggled with their own insecurities or simply desired a safe space to explore their personal journeys. Little by little, our sauna transformed from a place of self-sought desperation into a community of sincerity, growth, and acceptance. As we gathered more often, the sound of laughter, shared stories, and the comfort of bare skin against warm wood turned our sanctuary into a fragrant blend of healing and camaraderie. It was intoxicating, watching as people uncovered themselves, both in body and spirit, fighting the urge to conform to societal standards. And within this newly formed tribe, I felt strength swell within me. Each person who walked through the door reinforced my belief that every struggle to be seen, to be understood, was an essential step on the path toward authentic relationships. It felt as if we were reclaiming the narrative of our lives together, each of us no longer afraid to emerge from the shadows into the light of acceptance. And so, as I sit here, reflecting on the journey from volunteering to be vulnerable to creating a safe harbor for others, I've come to realize that sometimes desperation leads us to unexpected places. The quest to be seen has morphed into a brighter vision of companionship, insight, and the realization that we are not meant to navigate these experiences alone. Each of us, stripped bare of judgment and fear, finds that true connection happens not in the obscured corners of our lives but in the shared spaces where our souls can breathe freely. Update: after the last sauna gathering, I've become more adventurous. We decided to organize a weekend retreat dedicated to embracing ourselves wholly, physically and emotionally. I never expected my search for visibility to blossom into this beautiful community. Marcus and I are exploring the next steps of our relationship, and I can genuinely say that I am learning to lift the veil of self-doubt not through sheer will, but through the love and support that surrounds me. Whether we pull it off or not remains to be seen, but if the sauna has taught me anything, it's the power of opening up, letting go, and letting the warmth of camaraderie wrap around you like a cozy embrace. As I stepped into the sauna that evening, a familiar warmth enveloped me, bringing with it an intoxicating mix of steam and laughter. It was a bustling Friday night, which meant the atmosphere was alive with friendly chatter and the soft sounds of splashes from a nearby hot tub. The scent of eucalyptus wafted through the air, mingling with the hint of soft skin meeting wooden benches, making it feel sacred, almost like a sanctuary. I glanced over at Marcus as he entered, his bright smile instantly lifting my spirits. We've come to cherish our time here, not merely as a shared space but as a canvas for our blossoming relationship, one filled with light-hearted conversations and moments of silence that spoke volumes. I was beginning to realize that my craving for being seen wasn't solely about the physical act of bearing myself, it was a deeper yearning for connection, a desire to let people into the raw honesty of who I was beneath those layers of skin and self-perception. As we settled onto the wide bench, I found myself reflecting on a recent conversation. Just the week prior, Amy, one of our more outspoken sauna friends, had playfully nudged me to consider how nakedness could serve as a metaphor for vulnerability, not just the absence of clothes but the shedding of emotional armor. When we strip away our insecurities and let ourselves be authentic, she said, her words dripping with warmth like the condensation on the windows, that's when we truly connect. I felt the gentle stirring of something profound within me as I came to terms with how much I held back for fear of judgment and rejection. I looked at Marcus, seeing the way he spoke with his hands, how his laughter invited me to lose myself in the moment, and I realized he didn't just see my naked body, he appreciated the layers beneath my skin, the quirks and vulnerabilities that made me who I was. As our conversations meandered that night, jumping from the silliness of everyday mishaps to deeper discussions about our childhood dreams, I found myself suspended in a state of blissful existence, fully engaged and present. I had never felt more seen or valued. The sauna, once a space I frequented out of desperation, evolved into a cherished place where affection and honesty flourished, entirely transforming my initial yearning into something profoundly beautiful. Eventually, as the water swirled softly around us, I took a leap into the depths of my thoughts without hesitation. You know, Marcus, I began, my voice a touch steadier than I anticipated, it's funny how this all started as a quest to be seen in a physical sense, but now, it feels like it's grown so much more. He nodded, eyes sparkling in the dappled light, and urged me to continue with a gentle smile, his presence radiating reassurance. I spoke of my evolving relationship with vulnerability, about how I was slowly dismantling the walls I erected around my heart and mind. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what it means to be comfortable in my own skin, not just physically, but emotionally too. The softening of his gaze communicated an understanding far deeper than words could convey. In that cocoon of warmth and acceptance, I felt a piece of my heart unlock, allowing all that I had grappled with to flow freely like the steam around us. Our laughter melded with the soft patter of the water, and under the weight of those shared moments, I began to acknowledge my fears of inadequacy. It felt liberating to confess my doubts, to speak them into existence rather than bottle them up. As the session waned, dipping into the cooler air felt almost shocking, and yet exhilarating. A shared promise hung between us, unsaid yet deeply felt, that we would continue to explore this newfound connection. In that moment, I realized that being seen had transformed from a desperate craving into a warm badge of courage. The sauna had taught me to embrace not just the warmth of physical presence but the raw, tender exposure of the spirit beneath, open, honest, and, above all, human. As we exited, laughter trailing behind us, I understood that true connection thrives not just in being seen, but in being trusted, loved, and cherished for the entirety of who we are. Months have passed since that first fateful leap into a realm of vulnerability, and now, as I reflect on my journey, I feel a sense of profound gratitude wash over me like that soothing sauna steam. Marcus and I have grown closer, delighting in every moment, be it within the warm embrace of the sauna or in our everyday lives, embracing our naked truths together. For those yearning to be seen, I've learned that the warmth of companionship is not found in the act of exposing one's body, but in revealing the colorful tapestry of our souls. Not long ago, I had approached the sauna searching for visibility, yet I now find myself standing on the precipice of belonging, hopeful of the future and eager for each moment yet to come. And with that thought, I know I'm ready to face whatever lies ahead, no longer just desperate to be seen, but content and the love and acceptance that dwells not just in places warm with steam, but in the deep recesses of my heart where understanding intertwines with connection, ready to embrace life and all its beautiful, naked moments. I still remember the excitement I felt leading up to my 30th birthday party. It wasn't just another year, it felt like a milestone, a moment to cherish, surrounded by friends and laughter. I planned everything meticulously. The decorations were vibrant, the food was catered from my favorite local eatery, and I'd even hired a small band to play some live music. My close friends were excited, and I could hardly contain my joy. But then came the day, and everything turned upside down when Sarah, my longtime friend, the one I thought would be there by my side, arrived with her squawking 1-year-old in tow. I could hardly believe my eyes. As I wrapped my arms around her for a hug, I noticed the baby, a tiny creature with bright eyes and a loud wail, clinging to her. "Hey, I couldn't find a babysitter last minute," she said with an apologetic smile. I'd always been supportive of my friends and their parenting struggles, but there was a time and a place, this wasn't it. As the evening wore on, the baby cried incessantly, punctuating the lively music with screams that made small talk nearly impossible. I felt my heart sinking. My friends were dodging the noise, trying their best to focus on conversations, but I could see the cliques breaking apart, the laughter dwindling. It was devastating to watch something that I'd meticulously crafted slowly deteriorate into chaos. I'd waited so long for a night of celebration, and now, all I could think about was how to salvage the joy. After a while, I found Sarah alone in the kitchen, the baby resting uncharacteristically quiet in her arms. I could see it in her eyes, she was tired, and I knew the stress of this situation weighed heavily on her. But I thought about all my friends gathered in my living room, their faces strained in an effort to connect amid the wreckage of the birthday festivities. So, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Sarah," I started, my voice low and shaky, "I really appreciate you coming, but it's tough for everyone with the baby here. Do you think you could?" I trailed off, unsure how to finish. I saw thoughts racing across Sarah's face, hurt, understanding, and then a kind of acceptance tinged with sorrow. "You want me to leave?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's my birthday, and I just wanted a fun night with everyone," I replied, my heart aching. In that moment, I felt like the villain of my own story. Asking her to leave felt selfish, but staying meant sacrificing my happiness, and potentially everyone else's. With a sad smile, she nodded, understanding the difficult position I was in. "I'll go." "I'm sorry," she murmured. As I watched her gather her things and slip away into the night, I felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief washed over me, mixed with guilt that left a heavy stone sitting in my gut. I couldn't believe I'd asked a friend to leave, but the party resumed after her exit. The music felt lighter, the laughter returned, but in the quiet moments, I kept reflecting on what had just happened. Was I truly the asshole for wanting a night free of distractions? I spent days questioning my choice and wondering if I'd made the right decision. It felt wrong to sacrifice the joy of my celebration for what felt like a moment of parental struggle. Eventually, I reached out to Sarah, uncertain and nervous, but I knew I needed closure. To my surprise, she responded with grace, assuring me that I wasn't a bad friend, she understood. We talked, and she shared the exhaustion and difficulty of being a new parent, how hard it was to navigate friendships that once felt easy. As we worked through the emotions, our bond deepened, and I realized that sometimes, in friendships, things get messy, and it's okay to feel conflicted. It didn't totally erase my guilt, but knowing she understood made it a little bit lighter. That birthday became a lesson wrapped in a celebration, the importance of communication, understanding, and the love that binds us, even when situations get messy. As the night wore on, the air around us thick with balloons and the scent of cake, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since the prior awkward moments. Laughter floated through the room like a warm blanket, reminding me of the joy we had all gathered to share. My friends were unwaveringly supportive, sipping their drinks and sharing stories, and it felt like the chaotic energy from earlier had melted into something more comfortable. Everyone had rallied to lift my spirits after that initial frustration, and in that moment, I began to feel celebratory again. But it didn't just stop there. My conversation with Sarah had opened my eyes to her world. I watched as she lovingly cradled her baby, who had finally quieted down, his little head resting against her shoulder. The sight brought a new wave of understanding. I had never completely grasped the challenges she faced as a new mother, the weight of responsibility mixed with exhaustion. As we spoke deeper into the night, she shared anecdotes from those first few months, the frightening sleepless nights, the endless worries, the whirlwind of love and confusion that came with a tiny human being entirely dependent on her. I found it fascinating, the way she navigated her life now so differently than before, and while my birthday was supposed to be about me, it had quickly become a channel for both of us to process our feelings, her about the struggles of new parenthood, me about feeling selfish for wanting the party to be a carefree escape. In those moments of raw honesty, I could sense our friendship evolve. It wasn't just me and Sarah from college trying to cling to the past. We were two adults carving out a new understanding of each other, moving forward even if our paths didn't look the same anymore. We laughed, cried, and even joked about how I could have set up a designated baby zone at my party, something I wouldn't have imagined saying just a few hours earlier. It felt refreshing to let go of the guilt that had been chasing me since that afternoon. I didn't know how to balance all these conflicting feelings, but talking it out with her made it feel less like a burden. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, and my friends began to trickle out with dollops of cake in hand, I felt a soft weight settle in my chest. It was a bittersweet mix of joy and melancholy. While the party was winding down, I also realized that this night had given birth to an unexpected clarity. I wrapped my arms around Sarah, and she melted into the hug like we'd done so many times before in our carefree youth. Instead of the usual light-hearted farewells, I whispered how grateful I was for her, and she echoed the sentiment. I could see it in her eyes. She was still the same friend I'd known, just now with layers, stories, and scars that I hadn't understood before. Later that night, after everyone had trickled away, I sat alone at the remnants of my birthday party, an untouched piece of cake still glaring at me from the table. I realized how this new chapter was more than just me getting older. It was about understanding that friendships ebb and flow with the seasons of life. We might not be able to hang out like we used to or do spontaneous fun things, but what we could do was find new bonds in the changes, in the complexities. It definitely wouldn't be smooth sailing, but after tonight, I felt excited to navigate it all together, kinks and all. This birthday, marked by its chaos, had gifted me the insight that sometimes what we need most is to listen, to empathize, and to embrace the messiness. Isn't that what growing up is about? As I fell asleep that night, visions of laughter and quiet conversations danced through my mind, weaving a tapestry that felt more profound than any single celebration could encapsulate. The days following the party carried a kind of buoyant energy, a strange mix of nostalgia and hope that wrapped around me like a favorite sweater. I found myself reaching out more frequently to Mia, now not just because of obligation, but out of genuine interest in her experiences as a new mom. Our conversations began to evolve. We'd swap horror stories about sleepless nights smeared with moments of joy that made the chaos feel almost poetic. I realized I'd never fully appreciated how much love and sheer determination went into being a parent until Mia shared her day-to-day reality, painting the mundane and the profound with the same brush. It was beautiful in its honest messiness, just like the night of my birthday. One rainy Thursday, as the sky poured like it was trying to wash the world clean, Mia stopped by for coffee. The heavy scent of freshly brewed espresso filled my small apartment as we nestled into the couch, her with her favorite throw blanket draped over her shoulders, me with a comfy sweatshirt and an eagerness that buzzed in the air around us. We laughed at an embarrassing story I shared about my awkward teenage years, and I could see her eyes light up as she ventured into her own past indignities. It felt like we were reclaiming some of the uncomplicated joys we'd shared before parenthood had stepped in to complicate things. But just when I thought the moment was blissfully drifting toward nostalgia, her phone erupted into a symphony of cries and vibrations. She looked apologetic as she fumbled for the device, and in that instant, it hit me just how much her life had changed. I could see the toll it took, the way her smile faltered for just a moment, like she was being pulled back into a world of responsibilities and sleepless nights. She answered the call, and I listened softly as the familiar sounds of a cooing baby interspersed with honking cars drifted from her phone. Often, I'd tried to imagine where our friendship would go, how the kids would be a part of it or how midnight calls would intersect with a new reality. But in that instant, seeing her navigate motherhood while holding on to our friendship, it felt like we were carving a new path together, one where complexities were acknowledged but not allowed to choke the bond we had. Post-call, Mia looked exhausted but refreshed, a paradox I was getting used to witnessing. "Sorry, it was my mom. She's picking up dinner so I can actually enjoy a night off," she explained, her voice lightening. I teased her about how she wasn't taking me out for dinner, and she laughed openly, the hearty sound pouring warmth through the room. As the evening rolled on, we settled into a comforting rhythm of conversation that breathed life back into our friendship. There was an unspoken agreement, to meet somewhere in the middle where kids and adult lives could merge without erasing who we once were. Our talks shifted between dreams for the future, both personal and professional, and sometimes we would pause, reflecting on the rather surprising detour our lives had taken. Each shared moment fortified our connection, and I found myself increasingly grateful for the present, for what we were building. Nights like these became the norm. A cozy dinner here, an impromptu playdate there, each hangout reinforced the idea that friendship was about adaptability. Mia's son came to frequent our get-togethers, and he'd inevitably end up stealing the show, his giggles filling the gaps of our sometimes serious adult conversations. While there were still moments of overwhelming chaos, and I admit, there were times when I found myself longing for those carefree days without baby talk and nap schedules, I often felt a new richness in the friendship that was slowly blossoming. As time passed, those tidbits of laughter echoed in my home, changing what I thought was needed to celebrate life's milestones. I came to embrace the idea that growth doesn't come from shying away from challenges but rather from embracing them fully. Each new layer added depth to our friendship, reminding me how still water runs deep. There was a moment, weeks after the party and our newfound understanding, when I had a creeping thought of guilt rise back up. Had it all been worth it? The struggles felt real and convoluted. But on a sunny afternoon with a gentle breeze wafting through my windows, as Mia's son giggled and reached for a crayon, painting the world with bright strokes, I felt an overwhelming wash of certainty. I was so glad I'd navigated this journey with her. Friendships may bend, but they don't break, they just find new shapes, new stories to tell. As I looked at Mia, her laughter and genuine happiness spilling over, I realized I wouldn't trade this journey for anything. For as long as I can remember, there has been a phrase that rattled around in my mind like an old song stuck on repeat: you can't have your cake and eat it too. It was one of those sayings my mom would toss out during our weekly Sunday dinners, not that I ever really understood what it meant. I mean, if you had cake, wouldn't you want to eat it? That question had gnawed at me since I was a kid, and as I grew up, I started to view this conundrum as a metaphor for my life choices, especially as I navigated the tricky waters of my on-again, off-again relationship with Jess. Jess and I had met in college, our paths colliding like two planets destined to orbit one another. We had our highs, filled with the light of new love, lazy Sunday mornings, laughing endlessly over board games, late-night cooking experiments that usually ended in disaster. But the lows could drag us deeper than I cared to admit, arguments about petty things that ballooned into volcanic eruptions, only for us to push reset and pretend they never happened. It was after one such heated fight about where we wanted our lives to go that I found myself on Reddit, sipping my lukewarm coffee, scrolling through Ask Reddit threads, looking for solace or validation. Someone had posted about phrases that made no sense, and there it was again, the phrase that haunted me: you can't have your cake and eat it too. I chuckled bitterly, realizing that it encapsulated my dilemma perfectly. I wanted both the stability of a committed relationship and the freedom to explore who I was apart from Jess. And with each scroll, my mind started to race. Was I being unfair by wanting both? As I deliberated, a thought struck me: maybe I was supposed to just decide, but how could I when each option felt fundamentally flawed? Jess had been so supportive of my dreams, but I couldn't shake this feeling that I was suffocating her with my indecisiveness. I decided to invite her over, thinking it might be easier to untangle these thoughts together. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the window, highlighting the chaos of our living room, books scattered on the floor, takeout containers still on the counter. When Jess arrived, her smile lit the room, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension vibrating between us. We sat on the couch, awkwardly trying to make small talk, but it soon fell flat. Finally, I took a deep breath and plunged into the depths of my thoughts, spilling out my fears and uncertainties while she listened, her face a mixture of surprise and understanding. I confess that I felt like I was wanting something I couldn't clearly define. Jess nodded, allowing me to speak without interruption, and when I finished venting, she looked at me softly. "It sounds like you're scared, but not of me or us," she replied delicately. "You're scared of becoming stagnant." Her words hung in the air, heavy with recognition. I hadn't put it together until she said it, but she was right. A part of me longed for adventure, the wild insatiable need to travel, to breathe experiences beyond the confines of our small town. Jess offered to help me explore that, suggesting weekend trips or classes that could satiate my craving for more, grounding me while still letting me spread my wings. And as we talked into the night, I felt that familiar warmth settle back into my chest. When I finally went to bed, it struck me, perhaps the real wisdom was in the idea that choices didn't have to be rigid. Maybe I didn't have to sacrifice one happiness for another. Maybe I could bake two cakes, one for now, and one for later. Weeks passed, and our dynamic transformed. We found ourselves signing up for dance classes together and planning a small trip to the mountains, combining my longing for freedom with our shared commitment. The phrase that had once felt so suffocating began to lose its power over me. I realized that while you can't have your cake and eat it too in a literal sense, life isn't always that black and white. The more I allowed Jess in on my dreams, the more support I felt, freeing me to embrace the complexities of my existence. In the spirit of the Reddit threads I had once sought comfort in, I thought it fitting to provide a little update, an epilogue of sorts. About a month later, Jess and I were planning a spontaneous trip to a beach we hadn't been to since early summer. As we drove, I turned the radio down and asked, "So, what do you want to do after this? More travel? Classes?" She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "How about both? We can have our cake and eat it too," she teased, and I burst into laughter, realizing that perhaps my journey to find balance was one I could continue sharing with her. That night, as I fell asleep, I felt liberated knowing that my life didn't have to adhere to anyone else's rules, and while I might never fully grasp the meaning behind that silly saying, I could at least make my own sense of it all. The days that followed were a delightful haze of spontaneous adventures and late-night musings, the kind of soft chaos that comes from living life on your own terms. Every morning, we'd meet at our favorite cafe, a cozy little place with creaky wooden floors and mismatched chairs that felt like an extension of our own eclectic personalities. The owner, an eccentric old man named Jonah, would greet us with the same goofy grin each time, saying, "You're 2 peas in a pod, ladies." It became a running joke, one that made us chuckle as we sipped steaming cups of coffee and shared our dreams, from obscure travel destinations to the prospect of enrolling in courses that would allow us to explore our creative sides. One morning, Sarah suggested we sign up for a pottery class. "Imagine the mess we'll make. It could be a disaster, but a fun one," she nudged, her enthusiasm infectious. I hesitated at first, intimidated by the idea of molding clay, then remembered my newfound mantra about balance. "Why not?" I said, surprising myself with my own eagerness, and we soon found ourselves with our names on a list beside a host of other brave souls willing to wrestle with their artistic limitations. The class turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences. We fumbled, laughed, and accidentally flung handfuls of clay at each other. The instructor, a warm woman named Linda, guided us patiently, her laughter ringing through the studio as our creations often morphed into something unrecognizable. Yet, with each failed attempt, I felt my heart loosen, the tension of needing to excel slipping away with every imperfect pot or crooked vase we shaped. It was liberating in a way I'd never expected, the act of creating becoming a therapy session and a celebration of our flaws and companionship. After one particularly absurd class where we mistakenly mixed red and green clay, resulting in an unpleasant shade that resembled an unappetizing stew, Sarah turned to me, her hands covered in a mixture of colors, and said, "Look at that. We just became abstract artists." As weeks passed, we also found ourselves exploring goods at local flea markets, capturing moments with our phone cameras, and building an impromptu scrapbook of our debauchery, filled with ripped ticket stubs, photographs of us making exaggerated silly faces, or random notes we jotted down purely for laughter's sake. One evening, while flipping through our new book of misadventures beneath the glow of fairy lights on Sarah's balcony, a wave of pure gratitude washed over me. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come from being trapped in the rigid expectations I'd once believed I had to follow. It was as if I had been carrying a heavy backpack filled with old ideas and rules about how life should be lived, and each experience with Sarah helped me to shed a few more pounds until I felt free to walk my own path. But just as I began to feel I had everything figured out, life threw a curveball. One night, after a lovely dinner where we feasted on Thai takeout and laughed until our cheeks were sore, Sarah suddenly grew quiet. I noticed her staring at her phone, her brow furrowed and lips pressed into a thin line. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked, concern threading through my voice. She glanced up, trying to muster a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's my mom," she said softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "She's going through a rough patch. I think she might need me." My heart sank at the thought of her leaving, the thought of losing what we had begun to build together in this journey of balance and creativity. In that moment, I felt a familiar knot of uncertainty tighten my chest again. "How long are you thinking of going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know. A week maybe? She just sounds really overwhelmed and I feel like I should be there." As she spoke, I could see the conflict written all over her face, her desire to support her family clashing with the joy she had found in our friendship. I felt a pang of selfishness at the very thought of her needing to leave. How could I remind her of the beautiful balance we had created if I was only thinking of myself? So, I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers in a brief moment of solidarity. "Sarah, you have to go. Family comes first, and I would never want to hold you back from that." We both sat in silence for a moment, holding on to each other, and I assured her, "I'll be right here when you come back. We can pick up where we left off." She nodded, a smile breaking through her sadness, but I could detect a hint of guilt in her eyes. I didn't want my own fears to dim the light of her compassion, so I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as memories of our laughter filled the air around us. In that embrace, there was an understanding. She needed to care for her mother, and I needed to let her go, at least for a little while. That night, as sleep washed over me, I wrestled with conflicting emotions, but I took comfort in the thought that we were both on our own journeys toward the elusive balance we sought. In the following weeks, Sarah was often across the phone screen, sharing snippets of her time with family, moments punctuated with laughter, but also clouded by a piercing worry. I kept up with our pottery class, crafting lopsided creatures that always brought me back to her and her infectious laughter. Each day felt like an exercise in patience, but I focused instead on immersing myself in my own creations, slowly learning that empty time not spent with friends could still be filled with purpose. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity but was merely a month, the day arrived when Sarah called, her voice ringing bright and clear on the other end. "I'm back. And I've missed you like crazy," she exclaimed, an effervescence that rivaled the bubbles in the soda I was currently sipping. We scheduled a reunion filled with stories and laughter over our favorite meals, but more importantly, it became an opportunity for both of us to share our growth during our time apart. As we settled on her balcony, our familiar space, I was overcome with a sense of completeness. As she spoke about her experiences with her mother, I realized that the meaning behind those quirky expressions we often laughed about had shifted yet again. Life was about embracing the chaos, the uncertainties, and the joy that comes from simply being present with each other, much like our beautiful messes in pottery class. And as the sun set, casting a warm golden hue over our playful surroundings, I felt not only the sensation of our connection rekindling but the understanding that balance didn't mean never being apart. It meant knowing we both could carry our journeys and support each other all the same. Looking back, I'd find it easy to chuckle at the foolishness of sayings that once perplexed me. Having our cake and eating it too became a cherished memory of sweet times shared, both together and apart. And as I lay my head down to sleep that night, the warmth of reconnection enveloped me like a soft blanket, reminding me that the true essence of balance was found not in the rigid chapters we penned but rather in the laughter, the love, and the art of simply being. In the weeks that followed, I found myself tackling each day with a renewed spirit, a vibrant sense of possibility filling the corners of my mind that had once been dimmed by the weight of expectations. Amelia and I dived into spontaneous adventures, our schedules freeing up in ways I had never thought possible. One weekend, we hopped into her old hatchback, the jazz music pulsating through the speakers, the air thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers as we drove toward the mountains. We ventured off the beaten path, often leaving our plans in the dust, reveling in the act of simply exploring. I remember one particularly magical afternoon when we stumbled across a hidden waterfall. Its waters glimmered like diamonds in the sunlight, and as we stood there, the roar of the falls cascading down drowned out the noise of the outside world, leaving only the sound of our laughter echoing around us. I found the purest joy in those moments, a kind of euphoria that made the silly saying, the one I had initially brushed off as nonsense, now feel like a charming puzzle I wanted to solve. Every time we indulged in a piece of cake, whether it was a slice from a charming coffee shop or the store-bought kind savored after an exhausting trek, it came wrapped in laughter, sweetening our wouldn't have been happy about it days. Yet amidst the joy was a quiet understanding that our journeys were not without their challenges. Each of our individual paths had begun to twist and turn, bringing unexpected obstacles even as they interwove now with shared dreams. As the leaves began to change with the approach of fall, a hint of worry settled in my stomach, neutralizing the sweetness of those carefree days with a pinch of salt. I felt a growing pressure about the decisions looming ahead, my career trajectory, my financial goals, the desire to move forward while also nurturing the beautiful bond we had started to build. One evening, as we sat by the fire at her family's cabin, I let those thoughts spill out, almost reluctantly. Does it ever feel like we're on a tightrope, swinging back and forth with so many expectations? I asked, watching the flames flicker and dance. The crackling would wrap around my voice, giving it a moment to linger in the air. Amelia paused, her marshmallow on a stick hovering over the embers. Oh, totally, she chuckled, but there was an edge of seriousness behind her laughter. You feel like you can only take one step before something gives? She continued, her expression thoughtful, but vibrant with understanding. Her candidness made it easier for me to articulate the knots I had been tying in my chest. I don't want to let go of these moments with you, but I also don't want to be chasing after shadows when there's a whole sun rising over here, I confessed, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her deep-set brown eyes. Somehow, my heart felt lighter after sharing, almost as if exposing those fears to the open air could diffuse their weight. She reached for my hand, a firm squeeze that reminded me we were in this together, even if the answers remained fuzzy. Maybe balance doesn't mean splitting everything in half, she proposed, a smile breaking through the seriousness that filled our exchange. What if we don't chase some imaginary ideal? We embrace this mess of emotions and decisions. As she spoke, I felt the tension ease, the warmth of her words curling around my heart like the smoke swirling above us. We settled into a comfortable silence, the only sounds being the crackling fire and the occasional pop of the wood, sensations that felt grounding amidst the shifting sands of our thoughts. They say it takes time to grasp the meaning behind common sayings, but in this moment, I understood that finding balance didn't require perfection. It simply needed honesty, understanding, and the willingness to reshape the narrative. Weeks turned into months, and together, we picked through the chaos, sometimes stumbling, but more often laughing, the echo of our carefree adventures merging with the sounds of life ahead. The holidays approached, and with them, discussions about where we might go next and how we could create lasting memories together. One evening, as snowflakes blanketed our town, I made a cake, our favorite recipe, as a way to toast to where we were and where we might go. The scent of vanilla woven with cinnamon filled her kitchen, wrapping us in warmth while echoing with nostalgic laughter from our past. As we enjoyed that cake, rich and decadent, it hit me how much I had grown. In my urge to find clarity, I had found companionship and the beauty of shared experience. I had learned to savor not only the sweet moments but also to embrace the complexities of life that often trailed behind, understanding that even in chaos, there could be joy. And it was in that kitchen, laughing over crumbs and crumbs of conversations, that I realized this journey was as much about cultivating joy in the mundane moments as it was about making big plans for the future. Months later, and as I sit here now reminiscing on those days, I have a sweet piece of knowledge tucked away in my heart. It isn't just about having our cake. It's about finding the right people with whom to share it, making sense of the nonsense together, crafting our own meanings, and knowing that in our laughter and shared experiences, we were crafting a life that looked unexpectedly beautiful. And so, with the summer sun peeking through my window and the birds chirping in delight, I take a deep breath, ready for the chapters that lay ahead. Blissfully unaware of the surprises they might hold. It started as an innocent Saturday dinner at my place, a gathering of friends to unwind after a long week. I had just moved into this charming little apartment downtown, and my excitement to show it off had reached a peak. The scent of garlic and lemon wafted through the air as I grilled some delicious veggie skewers and sautéed shrimp for those who weren't adhering to special diets. Among the group was Lisa, my close friend since college, who had recently identified as pescatarian after not touching red meat for years. I respected her choice, but I knew her habits could sometimes waver in social settings, especially with good food around. It was almost comical how she would swoon over my culinary decisions, her large brown eyes lighting up with excitement at each platter I presented. As the evening unfolded with laughter and wine, I watched her dive into the shrimp with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. It was amusing until it suddenly struck me, an unsettling thought, as if a fog had drifted into my usually clear mind. "Hey, Lisa," I said, attempting to tease her lightly, "you know if you eat that, you might as well wave goodbye to your pescatarian label." Everyone laughed, but I was only half joking. I could see the glimmer of guilt in her eyes flicker and fade as she popped another shrimp into her mouth. The atmosphere shifted slightly, we all resumed our chatter, but I could sense her internal struggle bubbling beneath the surface, like the tension of a taut string ready to snap. Eventually, the night made its inevitable descent into messy revelations, and we all plopped down on the couch, a few drinks in hand. That's when she admitted it. "You know," she began hesitantly, "sometimes, I wonder if I really want to be pescatarian. The way everyone went to town on your food tonight. I felt like I was missing out." It was clear that she was wrestling with herself. She'd always been passionate about her choice for ethical reasons, yet every time she encountered temptation, she felt more and more conflicted. I sighed, struggling with the gravity of what I was about to say. I didn't want to sound harsh, but the truth was nagging at me. "Look, Lisa, I started, choosing my words carefully, it's your choice, and I respect it, you know that. But if you can't resist shrimp on occasion and it's giving you this much anxiety, maybe you need to reevaluate why you're doing it. It's okay to admit you want to enjoy food, even if it doesn't fit into one label or another. The room fell quiet, the air thickening with unspoken sentiment, and I could feel the weight of my statement sinking into my gut. I could read her face like a book: confusion, frustration, anger. She snapped back, "So, it's my fault I ate meat? Thanks for making me feel like a monster." That stung, more than I expected it would. I felt my heart race, a familiar surge of defensiveness rushing up like a wave. I didn't want to be the villain in her narrative. "No, that's not what I meant," I stammered, my voice softening. "I just think it's important to own our choices, you know? If you're really struggling, maybe it's time to rethink how rigid you want to be." My intentions glimmered under the weight of her hurt, and I regretted my delivery. After a few moments of silence that felt like an eternity, she sighed deeply, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. "I guess. It just feels hard sometimes, navigating these choices in a world full of delicious foods. Maybe I need to reconsider how I label myself," she admitted, her voice quieter. I could sense we both were still processing. It was complicated, like a beautiful, messy tapestry of feelings engaged in an unresolvable dance. Later that night, as the remnants of our feast lay scattered around us and we finally drifted into lighter conversations again, I felt a poignant shift. I wasn't sure if my words had genuinely struck a chord, but something shifted in her demeanor. I realized that, in trying to signal her toward her own truth, I hadn't meant to reprimand her. Instead, it felt like we were both involved in a delicate dance of self-discovery, two friends navigating the overpowering waves of guilt and desire in a chaotic sea of culinary choices. Months later, I received a text from her. "Hey, started trying some new things in the kitchen too, like I'm experimenting with being less strict with my vegetarianism. Thanks for that night, really." I smiled at the screen, relieved. It reaffirmed something vital. We weren't just friends tossing around labels, we were evolving together, reshaping our identities and learning to embrace the shades of gray instead of the rigid divisions we'd created. It was early evening when I received that text, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting my living room a soft gold. I could feel the warmth wrap around me like a familiar blanket, but there was a strange intensity bubbling inside. I was relieved, yes, but a part of me couldn't help but gnaw on the edges of that moment. The weight of our past conversation lingered. I remembered how tense it had felt after she took that first bite of steak at the grill, the way her eyes widened in disbelief and almost guilt, like she'd broken an unspoken rule. "You know it's not just steak, right? It's about understanding our choices," I'd said, words spilling out before I caught myself. I felt like a counselor and a friend at once, grappling with my own frustrations about rigidity and rules in a friendship that should have room for exploration. That night, our laughter had mingled with the smoke from the grill, but the air had also been thick with an unaddressed tension. I found myself worrying how our culinary debate had left her feeling. Yet here she was now, admitting that she had begun playing with those rigid lines we once underlined so boldly. I felt a sense of pride wash over me, an unexpected warmth to see her moving past the guilt that had shadowed her for months. I typed back, careful yet upbeat, "Really? That's awesome. It's about what feels right for you, not what we think it should be." I hit send and slumped back into the couch, heart racing slightly. It reminded me of that old saying, to be true to oneself, but how hard it can be. I often struggled with that truth too and realized that questioning things, especially our choices in domains as personal and emotive as food, was not just a trait of culinary exploration, it was a manifestation of a larger conversation about identity. I glanced at my half-empty plate from dinner, the remnants of my own dietary decisions. I'd been having seafood, mostly, saving myself from the more unpalatable choice of red meat. Was it that different from her shift? Is it really just about the food, or is it about comfort in the chaos of adulthood, growing, bending, and reshaping ourselves? Days turned into weeks, and those philosophical inquiries played in my mind as background music, mingling with the sweet aroma of my kitchen experiments. I swiped through my social media later and saw her post, an impeccable plate of sautéed vegetables with shrimp, vibrant and mouthwatering. The caption read, "Just because I love plants doesn't mean I can't embrace a bit of the sea, right?" I chuckled, an involuntary sense of triumph swelling in my chest. She was molding her narrative and allowing the waves of culinary joy to drown out the self-imposed storms of guilt. It made me want to push my boundaries too, Perhaps I could venture into vegetarian dishes beyond my comfort zone. Somewhere in that back and forth of support and experimentation, we found ourselves interwoven, each dish a tile in a mosaic of our friendship. I realized that her choice, or the softening of her restrictions, didn't negatively impact our connection, it only deepened it. One weekend, we agreed to cook together again, a full few hours reserved for culinary exploration. As we diced and chopped, we talked freely, about our lives, our aspirations, the uncertainty swirling around us like the steam from the pans. By the time we tasted our third dish, the vulnerability we both carried transformed into a playful banter. "So if I make my famous crab cakes next week, can you handle the temptation?" she teased, and I couldn't help but throw my head back in laughter. Temptation? Oh, come on. I'll still be here, side by side, in this delicious gray zone, I replied. And suddenly, it felt less like a debate and more like exploration, a shared journey through choices seasoned with genuine care and understanding. I leaned on the counter, ready to whisk my hands into the next dish, feeling our friendship getting thicker, hearty like the meal we were about to create. Life is messy, and the lines are often blurred, but in that kitchen, amidst laughter and the inviting aroma of shared meals, I felt alive, truly, deeply alive. I couldn't predict the future, or if she'd return to a stricter vegetarian path, but I realized it hardly mattered. We were simply living, exploring, shaping ourselves with each meal shared, every step an invitation to experience the beautiful chaos together. That afternoon, with sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection to my friend. As I set about chopping vegetables, bright peppers, fragrant garlic, and crisp spinach, I could practically sense her presence beside me. We had planned to conjure up a new recipe together. We called it Meal Assembly Gone Wild, an excuse to toss everything we had on hand into one big bowl and see what happened. It wasn't just about food, it was a metaphor for where we were in life, melding our separate journeys into something vibrant, unique, and delicious. Just as I reached for the onions, my thoughts drifted back to that fateful dinner months ago, when she had taken a forkful of the salmon, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is so good, but what if I regret it later?" she asked, laughter bubbling just under the surface of her conflicted expression. Now, with each clatter of the pan and splash of sauce, I realized we had both changed since that night. We had stepped away from rigid definitions and found invigorating freedom in playing with the rules. "Hey, maybe we could throw in some shrimp for a little kick?" I called out to her, eyebrows raised playfully. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the imaginary scales of her vegetarianism before nodding eagerly. "Yeah, why not? Let's do it." And just like that, we tumbled deeper into our culinary exploration, an unwritten agreement forming in the air between us, that this space was safe for experimentation, for letting go, for embracing the pleasure of the unexpected. As the aromas mingled and enveloped us, rich and enticing, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, her smile wide as she mixed ingredients with wild abandon. It echoed the joyful spirit this journey had instilled in her. There was a new confidence in the way she moved, a contrast to the uncertainty that used to shroud her culinary choices. I felt proud, not just of our dish, but of her bravery to navigate the ambiguity of her identity. It felt like we both were adding layers to ourselves, new textures and flavors that complemented who we had always been at our core. "Do you think this would make a good post for the blog?" she asked, tossing a playful strand of hair over her shoulder. She loved sharing our culinary escapades online, a creative outlet that gave her an avenue to connect with others exploring similar paths. I nodded, grinning. "Absolutely. And we can call it Dancing with Delicacies, a pescatarian journey or something cheeky like that." Our laughter rang through the kitchen, warm and easy, a reminder that moments like these were worth cherishing. As we plated our creation, the vibrant colors inviting and bold, I felt a warmth blossom in my chest, a realization that this friendship had transformed into something richer than I ever anticipated. We had wandered outside the boundaries we once imposed on each other and found a deeper bond through the art of sharing meals. It was about honoring our individual choices while still celebrating every messy, beautiful meal we pulled together. Later, as we sank into the clinking of forks against plates, I took a moment to observe her. She was savoring each bite, letting flavors linger on her tongue as memories intertwined with our laughter. I suddenly felt the urge to share something, an acknowledgement of our journey, our vulnerability. "You know," I said, looking straight at her, "I didn't want to tell you how to feel about your food choices, but I did want you to know it was okay to explore. You remind me that life doesn't come wrapped up in neat packages." Her gaze softened, and after swallowing, she replied with a thoughtful nod. And you remind me that it's okay to step beyond the labels we put on ourselves. This journey with you is exactly what I needed, to stop fearing the gray areas. Our conversation ebbed and flowed across the table just like the food, intertwining and rich. As we cleaned up, I reflected on how, for each forkful we took, it was more than just a fusion of flavors, it was a celebration of friendship, acceptance, and the beautiful mess of growing together. I didn't know where her culinary exploration would lead next or how her relationship with food and identity would continue to evolve, but I felt a sense of calm in the uncertainty. We were both learning to embrace the chaos and quirks of life without the need for rigid definitions, a true friendship woven tighter with every meal shared. It all began one breezy afternoon, the golden light softly washing over my living room as I contemplated the simple yet profound rules that shaped my family dynamics, rules I had never quite realized would lead me down a rabbit hole of conflict and introspection. I had always treasured the close bond we had with my mother, a relationship built on love, memories, and the occasional clash of strong wills. But one evening, as my 8-year-old daughter, Alice, casually referred to my mother as honey during dinner, I felt a jolt, a dislocation of sorts within my heart. To most, this would seem harmless, a term of endearment seamlessly woven into the fabric of family life. To me, however, it opened a floodgate of unresolved emotions. I grew up witnessing my mother's complicated lifestyle, riddled with bouts of neglect and fierce independence that often made her more of a friend than a caregiver. I never questioned the absence of authority in her role, and yet, hearing Alice call her honey felt like an invitation to intimacy that my mother had not earned, a privilege I feared she would abuse. As the days rolled on, I wrestled silently with my feelings, peering into the depths of my mother's approval-seeking behavior, a pattern that had burned me time and again. I decided it was time to set boundaries that would shield my children from the unpredictability of her affection, and so I told Alice, "Sweetheart, it's not okay to call Grandma honey. Her name is Grandma." For Alice's naturally curious and sensitive nature, this prompt seemed a perplexing riddle, her eyes brimmed with confusion, and I instantly felt a twinge of guilt. Yet I knew this was one of the only ways I could protect my children from the emotional instability that lurked beneath my mother's charming exterior. I imagined possible scenarios, Alice running to her honey for comfort, only to have those sweet moments twisted into half-hearted fits of affection that would leave her confused and wounded. That alone rearranged the pieces of my heart as I guided my daughter to navigate relationships with care. Yet, my gentle restrictions, which I viewed as necessary, did not sit well with my mother. She confronted me during one of our weekly calls, her usually warm voice growing strident as I could tell her feelings were hurt. "Why can't my grandchildren call me what they want?" she asked, her emotional undertones thickening the air between us. I felt compelled to defend my position, explaining that I wanted to maintain clear boundaries for their well-being, citing a few painful memories from my childhood that felt necessary to share. Instead of understanding, however, my revelations only fueled her resentment, breeding a kind of animosity that I had hoped to avoid. "You think you're protecting them," she snapped, "but all you're doing is pushing me away." Caught in that tsunami of emotions, the guilt over distancing my children from their grandmother and the insistence on maintaining their mental health, I found myself questioning whether I truly was the villain in this tale. Days passed, with tension hanging palpably in the air, until, one evening, my husband offered insight that struck a nerve. "You're just creating a cycle," he said softly, prompting a cascade of realizations. In my zeal to protect my children, I had inadvertently mirrored my mother's behaviors, shutting her out just as she once shut me out. As the weeks rolled into months, I let go of my rigid stance and, with a mixture of trepidation and hope, confronted my mother once more. We met in a local cafe, a place where we could relay the unspoken words over warm cups of coffee. I took a breath, recognizing the fragility of our interaction, and nervously explained, "I want to share this love with my children but fear for their emotional health." To my surprise, she opened up, acknowledging her past mistakes, and in that moment of vulnerability, I could see her as a flawed human being rather than the formidable figure I had cast her as for so long. We talked for 3 hours, our words weaving a new understanding among the crisscross threads of hurt and love. By the time we left that cafe, we made a gentle pact. My children could call her whatever felt right, but curiosity would remain the guide. If my mother's affection strayed into chaos, I would be there to help them navigate through the tumult, lifting them back onto their feet when the light dimmed. It was a delicate balance, but so long as we kept communication coherent, there was a glimmer of hope for a new chapter. Months later, my kids call her Grandma, Honey, and sometimes even Grandma Honey on whimsical days. It brings a smile to my face, a small triumph of compromise over conflict. Reflection has carved deeper insights into my soul, and if I've learned anything from this saga of boundaries, it's that relationships thrive where understanding flourishes, even from the pains of our past. As I gaze at my mother with a heart filled with tenderness rather than resentment, I remind myself that although nobody is perfect, the love we share can still bridge the gaping chasms left behind by misunderstandings. I've become the guardian of my children's choices, but in opening the door just a crack, I've also invited my mother into a more stable chapter of our lives, one where love doesn't have to be earned or lost, only shared. Our evenings began to take on a new rhythm, one where laughter resonated through our home in a different way. The clinking of dinner plates mingled with soft conversations, and during those times, I watched my mother transform before my eyes. The rigid demeanor she wore like a shield slowly melted away, revealing glimpses of the woman I remembered from my childhood, the one who would spin fantastical tales of her youth and make blueberry pancakes on Saturday mornings. Each time my children called her honey, it felt like they were shaping their own relationship with her, possibly one built on affection rather than the fraught history I had held onto for so long. I began to understand that the term didn't erase the years of disappointment, rather, it was a step toward redefining connection, an invitation for both my mother and my kids to forge a bond that could empower them all. It wasn't easy. I still felt pangs of concern whenever my mother slipped into old habits, her sharp tongue ready to cut down any misstep with a quip that could sting. One evening, as my daughter, Lily, baked cookies with my mother, I caught a glimpse of their interaction from the kitchen doorway. My mother had an apron tied around her waist, flour dusting her cheek as she helped Lily roll out the dough. They giggled so genuinely that it made my heart swell, but almost immediately, a familiar icy apprehension chilled my joy. Had I truly invited someone who had disappointed me in the past into my children's sacred spaces? But as I sat watching, I realized that this was my mother trying to change, to fit into a narrative that no longer centered on her past failures but on the potential for love and acceptance. That realization sparked something in me, an acceptance that some relationships are worth bending rules for. Gradually, I found myself loosening the tight grip I had on my judgment, allowing myself to witness moments that reminded me of the shared humanity between us. One rainy Saturday, my mother and I sat on the porch while the kids splashed in puddles, the sound of their laughter muffled by the patter of raindrops on the roof. We exchanged small talk, and when I brought up her choices in the past, she surprised me with an unexpected openness. "I know I messed up," she said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I didn't have the tools or the knowledge then. I want to learn, not just for myself, but for them. For you." I was taken aback. The recognition of her shortcomings was something I had longed to hear, yet it felt surreal to finally take a step together in something resembling vulnerability. There was no dramatic confession, just a genuine attempt to connect over our shared history. I felt a lightness in my chest, a whisper of hope that perhaps we could build something stronger together. A week later, while we picnicked in the park, Lily climbed into my mother's lap, looking up at her with awe. "Honey," she called sweetly, "can you tell us about the time you met the runaway dog?" My mother's eyes sparkled at the thought, and as she started to weave a story filled with charm and whimsy, I noticed the children were completely engaged, hanging on to each word and all the playful embellishments. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel the urge to guard the children from their grandmother. I realized I was letting go of the fear that had gripped my heart for years. I smiled, absorbing the moment, where laughter echoed through trees swaying gently in the summer breeze, and I began to see the foundation of a relationship being built. Right before my eyes. It was with a sense of cautious optimism that I concluded this journey. The path to evolving our relationship was not without bumps. We often still navigated through the minefield of miscommunication and unspoken grievances. Nevertheless, I held on to the belief that building trust took time and that love could flourish amongst the fragile roots of our shared past. Days turned into weeks, and the more I witnessed my children's genuine affection for my mother, the deeper my resolve grew to encourage it. Sure, we faced setbacks along the way. Old habits die hard, and sometimes my mother would slip back into sarcasm or dismissive remarks. But I could intervene, guiding her tone or redirecting the emphasis in our conversations without that ever-present burden of guilt. As the seasons shifted, so did our family dynamic. Thanksgiving rolled around, and as we gathered around the table, Lily took it upon herself to have everyone share what they were thankful for. When it was my mother's turn, she looked at the room full of grateful eyes, and with a quivering voice, she said, "I'm thankful for second chances, for a family that could forgive and, more importantly, for the love that connects us even when we have the past whispering in our ears." In that moment, my heart swelled, a quiet comfort settling in, as I recognized that perhaps the new chapter we were all seeking wasn't just about rebuilding what was lost but also about discovering new facets of each other. Watching my children engaging with their grandmother, embracing her as honey, taught me that healing takes time and that love is a tapestry woven from acceptance and understanding. I realized I'd become less the guardian of their choices and more a nurturer of their relationships, guiding them through the fragile landscapes of familial dynamics with newfound wisdom. And as I reflected on the journey we shared, smiling at the laughter resonating between the walls of our home, I felt a sense of peace. Healing and connections are not linear paths, they are messy, intricate, and absolutely worth every twist and turn. In the months following, we continued to foster this merging of families, keeping communication open and embracing one another's imperfections. Life hadn't magically transformed overnight, but we had discovered ways to create a rhythm that celebrated our unique individualities. I dared to believe that, while relationships are complex, they are also transformative. Each time I caught my children calling my mother honey, I would smile softly, knowing that they are building bridges that I had once thought irreparable. In doing so, we were not just healing old wounds but laying the groundwork for a beautifully intricate tapestry of love that could stretch across generations. As we moved further into this new chapter, I watched my children blossom in the forgiving warmth of their grandmother's embrace. It was a subtly beautiful transformation. At times, I would overhear them whispering secrets to her, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves outside our window, painting a picture that felt rich and vibrant. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere we used to have, filled with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. Instead, there was a lightness in the air, a tangible ease that swept through our home like a gentle breeze. My mother began to impress upon them the same stories that once wove the fabric of my own childhood, tales of adventure and mischief shared with my siblings that transformed even the simplest moments into cherished memories. I could see it in her eyes. Each mention of honey from my kids was a reminder that she could still be a good grandmother, that love could be expressed in many ways, and that forgiveness was not the absence of past hurts but the acceptance of them. It wasn't without its awkward moments, of course. There were times when I couldn't help but wince, memories of her difficult past rushing back like an unwelcome tide. But then I would remind myself that everyone is just a story waiting to be rewritten, and change, however small, deserves to be celebrated, even if it takes time to feel whole. One particularly serene afternoon, we gather in the living room, the sun pouring warmth through the windows, casting a golden hue on the walls. My children are sprawled on the floor, building a tower of blocks that seems to teeter precariously, while my mother sits nearby sipping her tea, her laughter ringing like the clinking of wind chimes. I glance at her, noticing how gently she guides their hands, offering suggestions instead of commands. "If we put this one here," she says with a smile, "it's going to topple less." I remember how, in my youth, her words often felt heavy, but now they dance lightly around the room, filled with affection. In that moment, I see the lessons unfolding, the ways in which they are teaching her patience just as much as she is teaching them about creativity and balance. It dawned on me that this new dynamic wasn't solely an opportunity for my children to connect with their grandmother but was healing me too, reshaping the broken pieces of our relationship into something sturdy and dependable. I allowed myself to breathe deeply, relishing the moment, when suddenly my daughter, engrossed in her building project, turned to my mother and casually said, "Hey, honey, can you help?" The word slipped out with the familiarity of an everyday phrase, and I could see the way my mother's eyes sparkled with joy, startled and delighted all at once. There was no hesitation in her smile, it was genuine and pure. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, scooting closer to help. A warmth unfurled inside me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch on hearing that name float from their lips. Instead, I recognized it as a marker of progress, a gentle reminder that my mother was patching the wounds of her past, stitching herself into our lives, and that I was finally letting go of some of mine. As days turned into weeks, I found that the small things began to shift. Our collective laughter echoed more freely, the unturned corner of my maternal heart felt lighter, and those earlier fears that had once held me captive began to dissolve like mist under the sun. I watched my mother slip more easily into her role, her hesitations fading with each visit. The kids grew more confident in their affection, using names of endearment that bounced off the walls and wrapped around us like a favorite blanket. Each honey became a reverberation of love and an acceptance that we were all imperfect in our ways, doing our best to stitch together the tapestry we called family. There was no grand epiphany, no fixed moment that illustrated our triumph, but rather the quiet realization that connection can flicker ignited even in seemingly insurmountable darkness through small acts of love and openness. As well as the growing comfort of understanding our shared journey, it was in these moments, simple yet profound, that I learned we had become a constellation, each star a unique point of light, interconnected by a shared history and new aspirations. And as I tucked my children into bed that night, their giggles still swirling in the air, I knew that we had turned a page in our story, one full of potential, ready to explore what it means to be a family in the truest sense. I whispered, "Good night, my loves," and as they snuggled deeper into their blankets, I couldn't help but smile, feeling the threads of our tapestry weave tighter around my heart. I closed the door softly behind me, letting the echoes of their laughter linger in the hallway, and for the first time in a long time, I felt an all-encompassing peace settle over me, a delightful realization that in the end, love always finds a way to triumph over pain. I still remember the moment it all shifted for us. It was a Friday evening about a year ago when my husband Mark had that accident at work, an industrial mishap that left him with severe injuries and a scattering of medical equipment that now defined our home. I used to think I understood what love and partnership meant, but standing in our living room surrounded by bedside tables laden with an oxygen tank and other gadgets was a stark wake-up call. At first, I poured all of my energy into being his caretaker. I learned to check his machines, set up appointments, and manage medications, all while juggling my job and trying to maintain some semblance of our previous life. But as time blurred the lines between being a partner and a caretaker, I began to feel resentful. I could attribute this weight to many factors: anxiety about his health, the fear of losing the man I loved, and the nagging feeling that my own needs were fading into oblivion. When Mark mentioned that I should take over his daily routines with the equipment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the stress or the fatigue, it was fear of losing myself in this role forever. The argument began softly, a simple question about battery replacements for his nebulizer, and before I knew it, we were shouting. "Why can't you just take care of your equipment like an adult?" I blurted out in anger, each word dripping with frustration and a hint of betrayal. "I didn't sign up for this, Mark. I didn't ask for a second job." The look on his face was heartbreaking, hurt and confusion dancing in his eyes. In that moment, I saw the truth in his silence. I might be pulling away, but he felt more trapped than ever. The emotional distance between us grew palpable, a chasm forged by my unwillingness to shoulder everything. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered. "I didn't want any of this to happen either, but I need you." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of our unspoken fears. I felt a rush of shame rolling over me at how my vulnerability came across. Was I the villain for wanting to step back or the victim of our circumstances? In the stillness that followed, I knew something had to change in how I handled the situation. I sat by the window later that night, listening to the distant sounds of life moving on outside while our little world felt suffocated by tubes and equipment. I needed to communicate, really communicate, about what I could handle versus where I felt frozen. It took time, but we found a way to talk it through, albeit imperfectly, acknowledging that my refusal wasn't about not wanting to help him but rather about taking care of myself too. So, I set boundaries, and he agreed to look into hiring a home health aide part-time. It was a delicate balance. I still aimed to support him, but I also stepped back enough to breathe. We've learned to navigate this uncharted territory together, even if the scars of that argument linger in the back of my mind. It isn't easy. But love, as it turns out, isn't just about caring for the other person, it's also about caring for oneself in the process. An update? Well, life is still a work in progress. We're still figuring things out, but we're trying to carve moments for just us, no equipment, just conversation, laughter, and the occasional silence that feels comforting rather than suffocating. It's strange how the mundanity of everyday life can intersect with the weight of profound change. Since that argument, I've found myself paying close attention to the little things, like the fresh scent of rosemary wafting from the oven as I cooked his favorite dish, or the way sunlight filtered through the curtains during our rare lazy mornings. I can still feel the tension wrapped around us like an unwelcome shroud, but I also sense the inertia of our relationship shifting, like a ship gradually correcting its course after a storm. One evening, we sat on the couch, the soft glow of the TV providing a backdrop to our quiet moment. I had just poured 2 glasses of wine, the Merlot colored deep as that lingering tension, when he turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about how this whole mess with my health has affected us." My heart dropped at the words "affected us" because that phrase had become our elephant in the room. "I don't want our love to feel like a burden to you," he continued, looking down at his hands, the ones that once felt so steady and strong. I could see the uncertainty etched in his brow, the shame that sometimes reared its head when we talked about his illness. Honestly, it has at times, I responded, trying to keep my tone even, though I could feel the stirrings of something that resembled guilt knotting my stomach. But it's not just you, you know? I sighed, searching for the right words. I felt lost, too, especially when I realize I can't take on everything. I want to support you, but I also need to take care of myself. A silence hung between us, heavy yet necessary, a moment where we were both just being. I thought about all those nights I had spent tiptoeing around his equipment, the sterile tubes and circuits that had invaded our space, feeling like guests in our own home. I get that, he finally murmured, lifting his gaze to meet mine, a flickering of understanding passing between us. It makes sense that you'd feel overwhelmed. I do, too. Sometimes, I wish I could just be normal. His admission stung, that longing for normalcy in a life where we had built a new reality marked by appointments and equipment. I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his, letting the warmth travel up my arm. But we're not normal. Not anymore, and maybe that's okay. Over the next few weeks, we began to talk more openly, not just about his health but about what we wanted for ourselves and each other. We made it a point to have designated unplugged days where we left the medical equipment in the closet and focused solely on each other. We went for walks in the nearby park, shared dinners at our favorite restaurants, and rediscovered our shared love for board games. Each laugh felt like a reminder that we had not lost ourselves to this struggle, even if we were forever changed by it. While the scars of our past arguments still lingered, they transformed into shared reminders of how fragile yet resilient we could be. An update? Life continues to be a roller coaster, but we have learned to embrace the ride together, feeling every rise and fall with newfound appreciation. So yes, we're still navigating our way through this uncharted territory, but now, we do so hand in hand, finding joy in the mundane and strength in each other. And perhaps that sense of acceptance, of our transformed normal, is the truest expression of our love. As days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting more on what it means to love someone who's facing health challenges while simultaneously learning to advocate for my own needs. I remember one quiet evening, the golden light of sunset spilling through the window, casting a warm glow across our cluttered living room littered with medical gear, the weight of everything settling heavily on my shoulders. It was one of those rare moments when we weren't talking about his health, but just sipping tea and listening to the sound of the kettle cooling down. It struck me that while I had learned to support him, I had also unintentionally built a little fortress around my own needs. I'd made my world so centered on him that I'd lost sight of my own joys. That realization felt like a weight lifting, but also a burden, like I was admitting to myself that I needed more than just being a caretaker. One night, after finishing a long day at work, I mustered the courage to bring it up during dinner. "Can we talk about something?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. He looked up from his plate, his fork paused mid-air, concern etched on his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" The care in his eyes reassured me, urging me forward. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore outside of this." I gestured to the various medical items around the table. "I still love you, but some days, just being your caregiver feels like it's consuming me." He nodded, seemingly absorbing my words. "I thought you might be feeling that. I've noticed you've been quieter lately." A softness came over him, a recognition of my struggle that felt validating yet daunting. I took a deep breath, appreciating his understanding rather than defensiveness. "I don't want to be resentful. I want to be better." That's when he surprised me. "You have every right to feel the way you do. We're in this together, but you shouldn't feel like you have to shoulder everything." "I mean, when was the last time we had a proper date? Just you and me?" His question lingered in the air, filled with possibilities. And from that simple inquiry, we started to carve out our us time in the chaos. It wasn't easy at first. The weight of that equipment always loomed over us, an uninvited guest in our plans. But we began to reclaim joy in small ways, an old movie marathon on the couch, board games that turned into laughter-filled evenings, and stargazing trips that fostered whispered dreams and sweet nothings. I'd find him in the kitchen trying out a new recipe or curled up with a book, making an effort to fill his own time unconditionally, which helped me to see the parts of him that existed beyond the illness. Still, I won't pretend there were no rough patches. Just last week, he struggled with a particularly tough day, and all my reminders to find joy seemed to slip away like sand through our fingers. I was tired, and the burden of his despair felt heavier than the mechanical equipment we'd come to know so well. I felt anger bubbling again, the situation feeling all too familiar, and I had to remind myself that it was okay to feel frustrated. I didn't want to retreat, but I also didn't want to be overwhelmed. It was during those moments that we both had to remember the tender balance of offering support while keeping our individual selves afloat. As we worked through those days, something shifted profoundly between us. Conversations weren't just about sharing burdens anymore, they became a space for authenticity. We learned that our love had to include vulnerability, not just in our struggles, but also in our triumphs and the mundane comfort of each other's company. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that it's okay to wobble and not always have it together, as long as we keep showing up for one another. We're not perfect, nor do we expect to be, but we're navigating with purpose, creating memories woven from resilience, laughter, and a shared commitment to honor our journey. Every step feels like we're writing not just a love story but also the tale of our growth and healing, together.